The Aeneid Reborn. Virgil's Aeneid, one of the cornerstones of classical literature, is a tale of destiny, duty, and the founding of Rome. But what would happen if this ancient epic were reborn in a modern context? The Aeneid Reborn is more than just a retelling. It is a reimagining that breathes new life into the timeless struggles of identity, belonging, and sacrifice. In this rebirth, Aeneas is no longer just a Trojan warrior fleeing a fallen city. He becomes a universal symbol of the refugee, the seeker, the one who must leave everything behind in search of a promised future. In today's global landscape, filled with displacement, war, and the search for meaning, Aeneas' journey feels more relevant than ever. He no longer sails the Mediterranean guided solely by gods and omens, but by fading memories and a burning hope passed down by his ancestors. His journey is as much internal as external, a battle to keep faith alive when the world around him crumbles. The gods, too, are reborn. No longer mere Olympians with whims and jealousies, they are now abstract forces. Fate becomes bureaucracy. Juno is the embodiment of institutional resistance. Venus is the hope that lives in our hearts, and the connections that remind us we are not alone. These divine characters, though transformed, still shape Aeneas' path, making the struggle feel hauntingly familiar. In the Aeneid Reborn, divine intervention takes the form of political power, social pressures, and historical forces that push and pull at Aeneas' will. As Aeneas journeys across this transformed world, we see echoes of ancient Carthage in the bustling metropolises he visits. Dido, the doomed queen of love, is recast as a visionary leader, perhaps a tech mogul or humanitarian, who offers Aeneas a tempting alternative to his destiny. Their love story becomes not just a personal tragedy, but a metaphor for the sacrifices demanded by ambition and legacy. In leaving her, Aeneas must abandon not just love, but the easier path, choosing instead to walk the harder road toward his destiny. When Aeneas finally reaches the land that will become his new home, the narrative shifts once again. The war that follows is not only fought with swords and shields, but with ideology, cultural conflict, and the fear of the unknown. Turnus, his rival, becomes more than an angry local prince. He becomes the resistance to change, the fear that grips a nation when outsiders seek to make it their own. The battle between Aeneas and Turnus, then, becomes a metaphor for integration, compromise, and the violence that sometimes precedes peace. The Aeneid Reborn does not offer easy answers. Like the original, it ends with a question mark, an uneasy victory, a future still unwritten. But its power lies in its ability to speak to our modern anxieties through the lens of myth. It shows that the quest for home, the burden of legacy, and the conflict between duty and desire are not just ancient themes, they are human ones. In giving new voice to Aeneas's Odyssey, the Aeneid Reborn reminds us that every generation must face its own storms and choose whether to become victims of fate or its authors. The Fall of Alba Longa. Long before the founding of Rome, nestled among the Alban hills of Latium, stood the ancient city of Alba Longa. Said to be founded by Ascanius, the son of Aeneas, Alba Longa was the heart of the Latin League and the cradle of Roman lineage. Its rise and fall are both shrouded in myth and history, yet the story of its destruction remains one of the most symbolic moments in Rome's legendary past. The fall of Alba Longa marks not just the end of a city, but the beginning of Rome's ascension to greatness. Alba Longa's history is deeply intertwined with Rome's foundation myths. It was ruled by a line of kings, descending from Aeneas, and ultimately gave birth to Romulus and Remus, the twin founders of Rome. Yet despite this noble legacy, Alba Longa was doomed to fall. Its collapse was not the result of external conquest or natural disaster, but rather an internal conflict that would pave the way for Rome's dominance. The central figure in this story is Tullus Hostilius, Rome's third king. Unlike his predecessor, Numa Pompilius, who ruled with peace and piety, Tullus was a warrior king, eager to expand Rome's influence. A dispute between Rome and Alba Longa, possibly minor in origin, was enough to ignite conflict. Rather than plunge both cities into total war, a symbolic resolution was devised: a duel between 3 Roman brothers, the Horatii, and 3 Alban brothers, the Curiatii. The outcome was dramatic. Though 2 of the Horatii were slain quickly, the surviving brother used cunning and endurance to defeat the wounded Curiatii one by one. Rome claimed victory, and Alba Longa was forced into submission. However, the city retained its own king, Metius Fufetius, who agreed to serve as a Roman ally. Yet Metius was disloyal, attempting to betray Rome during a later conflict with the Etruscans. Tullus Hostilius responded with decisive cruelty. After discovering Metius' treachery, he ordered the Alban king to be torn apart by chariots, one of the most brutal punishments recorded in Roman lore. Following this execution, Tullus gave the order. Alba Longa was to be destroyed. The city was razed, its people absorbed into Rome, and its noble families, like the Julii, were granted Roman citizenship, strengthening Rome's political and cultural identity. The fall of Alba Longa is more than a story of conquest. It represents the symbolic transfer of power from the older mythic world of Trojan lineage to the rising power of Rome. By destroying its ancestral city, Rome cut ties with its past and declared itself the heir to a new destiny. It was a political and psychological rebirth. Rome was no longer a backwater settlement, but the emerging heart of a future empire. In Roman eyes, the destruction of Alba Longa was not a tragedy, but a necessary evolution. It allowed Rome to absorb Latin culture, consolidate power, and assert dominance over the region. The fall was, paradoxically, a foundation. As Alba Longa's walls crumbled, Rome's rose higher. The torch had passed, not from one city to another, but from legend to history. Mars chosen. In the heart of Roman mythology and legend, Mars stands not only as the god of war, but as the father of a people destined to rule the world. To be Mars chosen is to bear the blood of battle, the burden of destiny, and the honor of divine heritage. The phrase evokes more than just a warrior's strength. It speaks to a lineage, a mission, and a legacy carved in both myth and history. The most iconic of Mars's chosen are the legendary twins, Romulus and Remus. Born of Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, and Mars himself, their story begins in danger and divine defiance. Threatened by a jealous king, the infant brothers were cast into the Tiber River, only to be saved by a she-wolf, an animal sacred to Mars, who nursed them back to life. This miraculous survival marked them from birth as destined for greatness. Romulus, the ultimate founder of Rome, embodied the ferocity and ambition of his divine father. His decision to build a new city and his willingness to kill his own brother to do so reflect the harsh, uncompromising qualities of Mars himself. In Romulus's hands, Rome was born from both vision and violence. He was not merely a warrior. He was the spark of a civilization, Mars' first mortal legacy. But Mars' influence didn't end with Rome's foundation. The very culture of Rome was shaped by martial values, discipline, loyalty, courage, and the glory of conquest. Roman soldiers believed they were fighting with divine favor, heirs to a god's will. Every legion that marched under the Roman standard carried the spirit of Mars into battle. Their red crests, gleaming weapons, and thunderous formations were not just signs of human strength. They were echoes of a god's wrath and pride. Even in politics, Mars chosen walked the halls of power. The Julian family, for instance, claimed descent from Aeneas, son of Venus, and by extension, from the union of divine houses. Julius Caesar, perhaps the most famous of this line, saw himself as both a soldier and a statesman, guided by divine purpose. His heir, Augustus, the first emperor, used Mars' legacy to solidify his rule. Temples were built, coins were stamped, and the image of Mars was invoked to justify the expansion of empire. Rome was not just a city, it was the chosen domain of a war god's children. To be Mars chosen is not without cost. It demands sacrifice, pain, and an unrelenting pursuit of victory. But with that burden comes greatness. Mars' favor meant more than triumph on the battlefield. It meant shaping history itself. Whether in the mythic acts of Romulus, the disciplined legions of Caesar, or the quiet strength of Roman mothers who raised warriors, the mark of Mars ran deep. Today, Mars chosen live on, not in temples or togas, but in the idea that destiny is earned through courage and struggle. The legacy of Rome and of Mars reminds us that those who rise in the face of chaos, who fight for something larger than themselves, are forever marked by the god of war. The 12 Labors of Hercules, Roman adaptation. In Roman mythology, Hercules, adapted from the Greek Heracles, was the mightiest of all heroes, a demigod born of Jupiter, Zeus, and the mortal woman Alcmena. Though his origins are Greek, the Romans adopted and revered Hercules as a symbol of strength, endurance, and triumph over chaos. His story, particularly the 12 Labors, became a cornerstone of Roman heroic ideals, embodying the virtues of courage, perseverance, and divine favor. The 12 Labors were penance for a tragic act. Driven mad by the jealous goddess Juno, Hera in Greek mythology, Hercules killed his wife and children. In his grief, he sought purification through the oracle of Apollo, who commanded him to serve King Eurystheus of Tiryns. This servitude took the form of 12 impossible tasks, feats that no mere mortal could hope to complete. 1. The Nemean lion. Hercules' first labor was to slay the monstrous lion whose hide was impervious to weapons. Using brute strength, he strangled the beast and wore its skin as his armor, a symbol of invincibility that became iconic in Roman statues and mosaics. 2. The Lernaean Hydra, a serpent with many heads, the Hydra regrew 2 for each one cut off. With the help of his nephew Iolaus, Hercules cauterized each stump, defeating the beast. To the Romans, this represented the struggle against persistent, multiplying evils. 3. The Ceryneian hind, a sacred deer of Diana, goddess of the hunt. The golden-horned hind symbolized swiftness and holiness. Hercules captured it without harming it, showcasing discipline, a trait the Romans held in high regard. The Erymanthian boar, this massive, raging boar, was captured alive by Hercules, again emphasizing not just strength but control, a virtue celebrated by Roman Stoic philosophers. 5. The Augean stables. Hercules was tasked with cleaning the filthy stables of King Augeas in a single day. He rerouted rivers to wash them clean, demonstrating ingenuity over brute force, an ideal echoed in Roman engineering. 6. The Stymphalian birds. Deadly birds with metallic feathers were driven away by Hercules using a rattle given to him by Minerva, Athena. It was another example of divine support for righteous strength. 7. The Cretan bull, symbolic of chaos, this rampaging bull was subdued and brought to Eurystheus, reflecting Roman ideas of bringing order to disorder. 8. The mares of Diomedes. These man-eating horses were calmed only after Hercules fed their master to them. brutal but effective, an act of justice fitting Roman notions of retribution. 9. The girdle of Hippolyta. A diplomatic labor that turned violent, Hercules had to retrieve the Amazon queen's belt. To the Romans, this represented the clash between civilization and the exotic other. 10. The cattle of Geryon. A journey to the edge of the world to retrieve magical cattle. This labor highlighted Hercules as an explorer, much like Rome's expanding empire. 11. The apples of the Hesperides, guarded by a dragon. These divine fruits required wit and negotiation with Atlas, showing Hercules' cleverness, a trait admired by Roman leaders. 12th. Cerberus. The final labor was to descend into the underworld and bring back Pluto's three-headed guard dog. By returning alive, Hercules proved himself beyond mortal. To the Romans, Hercules was more than a hero. He was a divine force of will, order, and perseverance. His labors became a metaphor for the Roman path, victory through struggle, discipline, and the favor of the gods. Sons of Romulus. The story of Romulus, the legendary founder of Rome, is one of blood, ambition, and divine destiny. But his legacy did not end with the drawing of Rome's first walls or the echo of his brother Remus's final breath. It lived on in those who came after him. The sons of Romulus were not just his biological or symbolic descendants, but all those who carried his spirit into Rome's future. Conquerors, lawmakers, soldiers, and citizens alike. They were the torchbearers of a vision that turned a humble settlement into the heart of an empire. Romulus, son of Mars and a Vestal virgin, was destined for greatness. Raised by a she-wolf and hardened by hardship, he carved Rome from wilderness with a sword in one hand and purpose in the other. From the moment he laid the first stone, he imbued the city with a singular character, bold, defiant, and eternal. The sons of Romulus inherited this legacy. Whether born of Roman blood or adopted into the Roman world, they were molded by the idea that Rome was not just a place, but a destiny. One of the earliest groups to earn this title were the Sabines, once enemies, later kin. After Romulus orchestrated the infamous abduction of the Sabine women to populate his city, it nearly led to war. But through the courage of those women, peace was forged, and the Sabines joined Rome. Their children, born of conflict and compromise, were truly sons and daughters of Romulus, proof that Rome's strength lay in unification, not just conquest. As the Roman Republic rose, the phrase "sons of Romulus" gained new meaning. It came to signify not just origin, but identity. Senators debating in the forum, legionaries marching across continents, and even farmers working the land. All were children of that mythic founder. They inherited Romulus's fierce independence, his disdain for tyranny, and his belief in the city above the self. Leaders like Cincinnatus, who relinquished power after victory, or Scipio Africanus, who carried Rome's banner to distant lands, embodied these ideals. In the Age of Empire, emperors styled themselves as divine heirs. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, carefully crafted his image as a new Romulus, rebuilding the city in marble and ushering in a golden age. He was followed by a long line of rulers who claimed descent, literal or symbolic, from the founder. To be called a son of Romulus was to be seen as a protector of Roman tradition, order, and supremacy. But the legacy was not reserved for the elite. In Rome's vast and diverse empire, people from Gaul, Africa, the Middle East, and beyond became Roman citizens. Through military service, law, and language, they were adopted into Romulus's ever-growing family. This inclusivity was one of Rome's greatest strengths, the ability to transform outsiders into inheritors of its myth. Even after the fall of the Western Empire, the idea of being a son of Romulus endured. Renaissance thinkers, medieval emperors, and even modern institutions have looked back to that founding moment for inspiration. The myth remains powerful because it speaks to something eternal. The desire to build, to belong, and to believe in a greater cause. To be a son of Romulus is to be a builder of legacy, a bearer of ambition, and a believer in the promise of Rome, strong, undying, and ever reborn. The Shield of Aeneas. In Book 8 of the Aeneid, Virgil presents one of the most powerful symbols in Roman literature, the shield of Aeneas. Forged by the god Vulcan at the request of Venus, Aeneas's divine mother, the shield is more than just a piece of armor. It is a vision of destiny, a prophecy carved in metal. It serves as both protection and revelation, depicting the future glory of Rome long before the city itself is founded. In this way, the shield of Aeneas becomes a poetic bridge between myth and history, between personal struggle and national triumph. When Aeneas receives the shield, he is preparing for war in Italy. His fate, and the fate of the Trojans, hangs in the balance. As Vulcan crafts the weapon, he pours into it scenes not from the hero's past, but from Rome's future. Unlike Achilles' shield in Homer's Iliad, which reflects the world in all its variety, peace and war, life and death, Aeneas' shield is singular in focus. The rise of Rome. The shield depicts key moments in Roman history, including the birth of Romulus and Remus, the rape of the Sabine women, the fall of Gaul, and perhaps most importantly, the Battle of Actium. Here, Augustus Caesar, Aeneas's distant descendant, defeats Mark Antony and Cleopatra, securing the future of the Roman Empire. By including these scenes, Virgil elevates Aeneas's personal journey into a cosmic mission. Aeneas does not fight merely for survival or honor, but to fulfill a divine prophecy, to lay the foundations of an empire that will rule the world. The artistic detail of the shield also reveals Virgil's deep political message. Written during the reign of Augustus, the Aeneid served in part as imperial propaganda. The shield's imagery glorifies Augustus as the culmination of centuries of Roman struggle and heroism. It portrays the emperor not just as a ruler, but as the fulfillment of fate, a new Romulus chosen by the gods. Through the shield, Virgil aligns Aeneas's journey with Augustus's rule, suggesting that Rome's greatness is both inevitable and divinely sanctioned. But the shield also carries emotional weight. For Aeneas, it is a sign that his suffering has purpose. Every trial he has faced, the loss of Troy, the death of loved ones, the hardships of exile, now finds meaning in the light of future glory. When he lifts the shield, he lifts not just armor, but hope. It reassures him and the reader that endurance will be rewarded, that sacrifice builds nations. What makes the shield of Aeneas truly remarkable is its dual nature. It is both a divine artifact and a human document. It reflects the Roman ideal of fatum, fate that must be embraced, not resisted. It reminds the reader that history is not accidental, but shaped by those willing to suffer and strive. In Virgil's hands, the shield becomes a literary masterpiece, combining myth, art, politics, and philosophy into a single object of immense symbolic power. In the end, Aeneas does not speak when he receives the shield. He simply lifts it onto his shoulder, rejoicing in the things pictured. In that silent moment, he accepts his destiny, and in doing so, prepares to change the world. Echoes of Latium. Before Rome rose in marble grandeur, before emperors ruled over a vast empire stretching from the Atlantic to the Euphrates, there was Latium, a patchwork of hills, forests, rivers, and ancient peoples nestled in central Italy. It was a land of shepherds, warriors, and gods, a land where myth and history walked side by side. Though its name is less known today, the echoes of Latium still whisper through Roman roads, in the ruins of forgotten cities, and in the very language we speak. Latium, Latium Vetus, was the ancestral homeland of the Latin people, stretching from the Tiber River in the north to the Alban Hills in the south. It was a region dotted with independent settlements, Alba Longa, Lavinium, Ardea, and others, that would one day be woven together through war, diplomacy, and fate into the fabric of the Roman Republic. Yet long before that unity, Latium pulsed with its own traditions, legends, and divine stories. According to Roman myth, it was to Latium that Aeneas, the Trojan hero of Virgil's Aeneid, journeyed after the fall of Troy. Guided by fate and the will of the gods, he arrived on the shores of Latium, where he was welcomed by King Latinus. Aeneas' union with Lavinia, the king's daughter, symbolized the blending of Trojan destiny with Latin tradition, a marriage not only of people, but of futures. From this mythical root, the Romans traced their origin, grounding their imperial destiny in the soil of Latium. The early Latin cities were fierce and proud, each ruled by its own king or council. They shared a common language, religious beliefs, and customs, yet maintained distinct identities. The Latin League, a loose confederation of these cities, served both as a military alliance and a cultural network. Religion was a unifying force. Shared deities such as Jupiter Latiaris were worshipped on the Mons Albanus, Alban Mount, where tribes gathered for sacred rites and festivals like the Feriae Latinae. The landscape of Latium shaped its people. The rugged hills fostered independence, while the fertile plains encouraged agriculture and trade. The presence of both coastal access and inland routes allowed Latium to become a bridge between Etruscan, Greek, and Italic influences. Even before Rome's dominance, Latium was a cultural crossroads, a place where myths from the East mingled with local folklore. Over time, Rome itself, a Latin city founded by Romulus on the banks of the Tiber, began to assert dominance. Through strategic warfare, shrewd alliances, and the absorption of neighboring peoples, Rome transformed from a regional power into the nucleus of an empire. Many of the ancient Latin cities resisted Roman control, but their defeat did not mark their erasure. Instead, Rome adopted and adapted their traditions, weaving the essence of Latium into its expanding identity. One of the most enduring legacies of Latium is the Latin language. Spoken first in the hills and valleys of this region, Latin would go on to become the language of law, literature, science, and religion. It was through Latin that Roman culture was expressed and exported, echoing through the Middle Ages into the Renaissance, and surviving today in the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Even modern English, though Germanic at its root, bears the mark of Latin through thousands of borrowed words. But the echoes of Latium are not merely linguistic. They are spiritual, architectural, and philosophical. The early Latin peoples held deep reverence for the gods of hearth and field, Vesta, Janus, Saturn, and these deities found their way into Roman religion, often reshaped but never forgotten. Rural religious practices, such as sacra privata, private household rites, persisted well into the Roman period, a living memory of simpler ancestral beliefs rooted in the soil of Latium. The Latin concept of pietas, a complex virtue involving duty to family, gods, and country, was not uniquely Roman, but inherited from these early Italic cultures. Aeneas himself is called Pius Aeneas, not simply for his bravery, but for his unwavering commitment to his divine mission and familial responsibilities. This ideal, would become central to Roman identity and leadership, influencing how Rome saw itself and justified its expansion. Ruins scattered across the region serve as silent witnesses to this ancient world. The remains of Alba Longa, though elusive archaeologically, still stir the imagination. The sacred road to Lavinium, the Via Sacra, echoes with the footsteps of pilgrims and priests. The Latin hills, dotted with villas, fortresses, and forgotten tombs, preserve the shape of a world that once thrived with vibrant life and whispered legends. Even as Rome grew and the city's focus shifted outward to distant provinces, Latium remained its sacred heart. Emperors returned to the Alban Mount for rituals. Poets like Horace retreated to the Latin countryside for inspiration. Statesmen sought omens in its skies. The land itself was seen as holy, a reflection of Rome's divine favor and historical destiny. In the Christian era, Latium once again transformed. Pagan temples gave way to churches and monasteries. Yet the rhythm of the land, the ancient hills, the harvest cycles, the reverence for tradition, remained. Pilgrims replaced priests, saints replaced gods, but the sacred aura of Latium endured. Even today, the hills of Lazio, modern-day Latium, are home to sleepy villages, ancient ruins, and chapels that still carry the layered stories of thousands of years. To listen to the echoes of Latium is to hear the voices of a people who lived in the shadow of myth and the dawn of empire. It is to understand that Rome did not rise from nothing, but from a rich and complex heritage that pulsed through the land long before Romulus lifted his plow. Latium gave Rome its language, its gods, its values, and its sense of destiny. And in return, Rome gave Latium immortality. Though centuries have passed and empires have crumbled, Latium lives on, not only in stone and soil, but in the stories we tell, the words we speak, and the ideals we hold. Its echoes remind us that even the greatest civilizations begin in small places, where the past whispers through the leaves and the future waits to be born. The rise of the Sabine Queen. In the annals of Roman myth and early legend, where gods walk beside mortals and empires are born from chaos, there emerges a figure often overshadowed by kings and warriors, a woman of peace, strength, and vision. She is not a goddess, nor a conqueror by the sword, but her name resounds with quiet power. Her story begins in conflict, but ends in unity. She is the Sabine Queen, and her rise marks one of the most profound turning points in the founding of Rome. To understand her legacy, we must begin with the infamous event known as the Rape of the Sabine Women, not an act of brutality in its ancient context, but rather a mass abduction. After Romulus founded Rome, the fledgling city lacked women and with them, the means to grow. Nearby communities, including the Sabines, refused to intermarry with the Romans, seeing them as uncivilized outcasts. Desperate, Romulus devised a bold plan. He invited the neighboring peoples to a grand festival in honor of Neptune, and during the celebrations, Roman men seized the Sabine women and carried them away as wives. What followed was not just outrage, but war. The Sabines, led by their king Titus Tatius, launched a campaign against Rome. The two sides clashed fiercely, culminating in a battle near the Roman citadel. But just as blood threatened to soak the earth, the Sabine women themselves, now wives and mothers in Rome, intervened. They rushed between the fighting men, pleading for peace. They begged their fathers not to kill their husbands, and their husbands not to slay their brothers. Their courage and compassion brought the battle to a halt. From this act of bravery, a remarkable shift occurred. The Romans and Sabines agreed to unite under joint rule. Romulus and Titus Tatius co-governed the city, blending their peoples into one. And among the women who had stood between war and peace, one figure stood out: Hersilia. In Roman legend, Hersilia was the wife of Romulus and one of the Sabine women taken during the festival. But she was more than a pawn of politics or myth. Hersilia embodied the ideal of reconciliation, one who bridged two worlds. Her loyalty to her Sabine roots and her role as Queen of Rome made her a living symbol of unity. Through wisdom and quiet influence, she played a vital role in shaping the early spirit of the Roman state. Following the death of Romulus, whether he ascended into the heavens or was consumed by the storm of fate, the legends say Hersilia mourned deeply. In some versions of the myth, she is rewarded by the gods for her devotion and transformed into the goddess Hora, an immortal presence of peace and harmony. This deification suggests just how profound her impact was perceived to be. The Sabine queen, once abducted, had risen not only to the heights of royal power, but beyond, into the realm of divinity. The story of Hersilia and the Sabine women is more than a myth. It reflects the Roman ideals of strength through unity, of civilization born from compromise. While Rome is often remembered for its conquests and iron discipline, its earliest legends reveal a more nuanced foundation. The very bloodline of Rome was mixed from the start. The Sabine queen represents the idea that Rome's greatness did not come solely from domination, but from the ability to absorb and transform its enemies into allies. In this light, Hersilia becomes the first matriarch of Rome, not in name alone, but in influence. She was the spiritual mother of a united people, a model for Roman women in centuries to come. Her virtues, modesty, strength, intelligence, and devotion would echo in the expectations placed on Roman matrons, from the legendary Cornelia, mother of the Gracchi, to the imperial women of later generations. But the rise of the Sabine queen is not only a story of the past, it speaks to timeless themes. Hersilia's journey from victim to queen, from peacekeeper to immortal, challenges the conventional roles of women in myth and memory. She does not wield a sword, but she stops a war. She does not wear a crown of conquest, but her influence shapes a kingdom. Hersilia's strength lies not in force, but in conviction, and that, perhaps, is the most powerful legacy of all. Moreover, the tale suggests that Rome's identity was never fixed. It was born of flux and fusion. The integration of the Sabines into Roman society set a precedent that would define Roman expansion for centuries. As the Republic and later the Empire grew, Rome continued to absorb the people it conquered, offering them citizenship, culture, and participation. It was this ability to unify diverse peoples under one idea, Roma Aeterna, that made the empire enduring. Hersilia's story reminds us that great nations are not built by men alone. Behind every battlefield, beyond every Senate debate, are the quiet decisions of those who influence hearts and minds. The Sabine queen never gave grand speeches or led legions, but she led by example. She showed that peace could be more powerful than victory, and that compassion could shape a city more lastingly than conquest. In art and literature, Hersilia has not always taken center stage, yet she has endured in statues, in mosaics, and in the subtle undercurrents of Roman myth. Her legacy survives in the moral values Rome cherished: family, harmony, and the sanctity of community. If Romulus was the founder of Rome's body, Hersilia was its soul. Today, as we revisit these ancient stories, the rise of the Sabine queen serves as a reminder that history is shaped not only by those who wield power, but also by those who wield peace. Hersilia's courage to stand between two warring worlds and her grace in guiding them toward unity remain a testament to the enduring power of reconciliation. In the stones of Rome and the hills of Latium, her voice still echoes, not in war cries, but in whispered counsel. Hersilia, the Sabine queen, may have been born of legend, but her influence is real, lasting, and deeply human. The Etruscan Oracle. Long before the rise of Rome, before legions marched across continents and emperors sculpted the destiny of the West, there existed a civilization shrouded in mystery and steeped in divine wisdom. The Etruscans, who flourished in central Italy from the 8th to the 3rd century BCE, were a people of profound spirituality, enigmatic customs, and visionary practices. Among their most revered traditions was the art of divination, reading the will of the gods not from books, but from the world itself. At the center of this sacred knowledge stood a figure both mortal and mythical, the Etruscan Oracle. The Etruscan Oracle was not a singular being, but a title passed down through generations of priest-diviners, known as haruspices. These learned men and women interpreted the signs of the gods, reading omens in the flight of birds, the crack of lightning, and most famously, the entrails of sacrificed animals. To the Etruscans, the universe was a living text, written by divine hands, and it was the duty of the oracle to read it aloud. Yet behind the earthly practice stood a figure of legend, Tages, the prophetic child of the earth. According to Etruscan mythology, Tages sprang from a furrow in the ground while a farmer plowed his field near the city of Tarquinia. Though childlike in appearance, he spoke with the voice of an ancient sage, revealing the laws of divination and the sacred truths of the cosmos. People from across Etruria gathered to hear him, and his teachings formed the foundation of Etrusca Disciplina, the Etruscan religious code. Tages' words were recorded and passed on by the haruspices, who became keepers of divine knowledge. They formed a caste of religious seers whose influence stretched even into Roman society. The Roman Senate often consulted Etruscan diviners during times of crisis, especially when signs in the heavens, or disasters on earth, hinted at divine displeasure. The voice of the Etruscan oracle, though born of a foreign culture, became woven into the fate of Rome itself. Unlike the Greek oracles, such as the famous Pythia of Delphi, who delivered cryptic messages from Apollo, the Etruscan oracle did not speak in riddles. Instead, it offered structured interpretation. The universe was believed to be divided into divine regions, each governed by a god. Lightning from the east carried different meaning than lightning from the west. The liver of a sacrificed sheep, carefully examined, was a map of celestial influence guiding decisions from war to marriage. Temples in Etruria were often built in accordance with these divine principles. Cities themselves were laid out following sacred orientations, aligning human life with cosmic order. The Etruscan oracle was not just a mouthpiece for the gods. It was a guide to living in harmony with the universe. Life, to the Etruscans, was not random or chaotic. It was a dialogue between mortal action and divine will. As Rome expanded and absorbed the Etruscan cities, much of this sacred knowledge was adopted and preserved. Though the Romans prided themselves on their rationalism and law, they never fully turned away from the mysterious art of augury. The College of Haruspices, a Roman institution, maintained Etruscan rituals well into the imperial era. Even emperors such as Augustus and Tiberius are recorded as having consulted Etruscan rites before major undertakings. But the power of the Etruscan oracle was not merely political, it was deeply spiritual. It connected the people to their ancestors, their land, and the divine. Etruscan tombs, with their intricate murals and elaborate artifacts, reflect a culture that saw death not as an end, but as a passage overseen by gods and spirits. The oracle spoke not only of the future, but of the afterlife, of balance, and of the sacred rhythms of nature. Despite the oracle's influence, much of Etruscan knowledge remains lost to time. Their language, only partially deciphered, hides untold insights into their beliefs and prophecies. Ancient texts mentioned by Roman authors, such as the Libri Haruspicini and Libri Fulguralis, are gone. What remains are fragments, bronze mirrors, inscribed artifacts, and the haunting images painted on tomb walls. These remnants whisper of a time when humans and gods spoke through signs, when thunder was more than weather. It was a message. The Etruscan oracle, though silent today, still echoes in the corners of Roman religion, in the architecture of ancient cities, and in the mysterious allure of Etruria. In modern times, the legacy of the oracle lives on in art, fiction, and scholarly fascination. Writers and historians have drawn inspiration from Etruscan mysticism, casting the oracle as a symbol of forgotten wisdom, a lost link between the natural world and the divine. In an age obsessed with certainty and control, the oracle reminds us of a time when the unknown was not feared, but respected, when the universe was not conquered, but consulted. Visitors to ancient sites like Tarquinia or Cerveteri can still sense the presence of this spiritual tradition. Standing amid the necropolises, where painted tombs depict banquets of the dead and mythic beasts roam, one can almost hear the whisper of Tages rising from the earth with the voice of prophecy. The Etruscan oracle is not just a tale of the past. It is a symbol of the eternal human quest to understand our place in the cosmos. Through sacrifice and symbol, through discipline and divine law, the oracle offered meaning to mystery, purpose to chaos. It was the bridge between earth and sky, between the known and the unknowable. As long as we look to the stars for signs, as long as we seek wisdom in nature, and as long as we ask the ancient questions, who are we? Why are we here? What lies beyond? The voice of the Etruscan oracle will never truly fade. The triumph of Scipio. In the pages of Roman history, few names shine as brightly as Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, the general who vanquished Carthage's most formidable warrior, Hannibal Barca, and saved Rome from ruin. His victory was not merely a military feat, it was a transformation of Roman destiny. The story of the triumph of Scipio is not just about strategy and war, but vision, courage, and the rise of Rome to greatness. The Roman Republic had suffered deeply during the Second Punic War. Hannibal had crossed the Alps with his elephants and carved a path of destruction through Italy. Rome had never faced a foe like him, brilliant, unpredictable, and relentless. The losses at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and especially Cannae, where tens of thousands of Roman soldiers perished, left the Republic shaken to its foundations. The Roman Senate was desperate, the people anxious, and the survival of the Republic itself uncertain. And then came Scipio. He was young, far younger than most commanders when he took the reins of power. Charismatic and intelligent, Scipio had already earned distinction in battle by the age of 17. But what truly set him apart was his daring plan: to take the fight to Africa, to Carthage itself, and force Hannibal to return from Italy to defend his homeland. It was a strategy as bold as it was dangerous. The Senate was hesitant. After years of war, committing forces to Africa seemed reckless. But Scipio's confidence, combined with his reputation for divine favor, some even whispered he was guided by the gods, swayed enough votes. Granted limited support, Scipio gathered his legions, forged alliances with Numidian leaders like Massinissa, and crossed the sea. The campaign in Africa was a masterclass in Roman generalship. Scipio was not only a warrior, but a diplomat. He understood that victory in Africa required more than swords. It demanded loyalty, understanding of terrain, and exploiting the internal divisions within Carthage. He outmaneuvered Carthaginian generals, won decisive victories, and steadily pushed toward the capital. Then came the fateful moment. Hannibal returned. The two greatest military minds of the age met at Zama in 202 BCE. Hannibal commanded a diverse army of Carthaginians, mercenaries, and war elephants. Scipio led disciplined Roman legions and seasoned Numidian cavalry. Before the battle, the two men met face to face. Hannibal, worn by years of war, reportedly warned Scipio that the gods often favored fortune over virtue. Scipio listened, unshaken. The Battle of Zama was a turning point in world history. Scipio countered the threat of Hannibal's elephants by arranging lanes through his infantry, allowing the beasts to pass harmlessly through. His cavalry, under Massinissa, routed the Carthaginian horsemen and returned to crush Hannibal's rear. The Roman lines held firm. Scipio's tactics were flawless. Hannibal was defeated at last. The war was over. Carthage sued for peace, and Rome imposed terms that left the once mighty city humbled and disarmed. Scipio had achieved what many thought impossible. He was hailed as a savior, and in recognition of his triumph, the Senate awarded him a title never before granted: Africanus, the conqueror of Africa. But Scipio's triumph was more than just a battlefield victory. It was a celebration of resilience and vision. In Rome, his return was marked by a grand procession. The Roman triumph, the highest honor bestowed upon a victorious general. Citizens lined the streets, cheering, throwing flowers, and praising the gods. Scipio rode in a golden chariot, clad in a purple toga embroidered with stars, a symbol of divinity and power. Behind him marched his legions, proud and decorated. Exotic animals from Africa paraded alongside chained Carthaginian prisoners. Treasures, statues, and spoils dazzled the onlookers. And at the heart of it all was Scipio, the man who had brought Rome back from the edge. The city erupted in celebration, and sacrifices were made to Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill. But Scipio's triumph also marked the beginning of a transformation within Rome. The Republic, once wary of kings and concentrated power, had now witnessed a man rise to almost divine status. Scipio, though loyal to Rome, wielded enormous influence. His popularity rivaled that of the Senate, and his family, the Cornelii, would become one of the most powerful in Roman politics. Despite his success, Scipio remained a complex figure. He withdrew from politics after a series of accusations and political attacks, retreating from public life rather than risk civil strife. He died in quiet exile, reportedly saying, "Ingrata patria, ne osa quidem habebis." Ungrateful fatherland, you will not even have my bones. Rome never officially honored his burial, yet time vindicated Scipio. Later generations hailed him as a hero of the Republic. He became a model for future generals and statesmen. Julius Caesar, centuries later, would visit Scipio's tomb in Hispania and weep before it. The young Caesar saw in Scipio not only a military genius but a path to greatness, and a warning about the cost of ambition. The triumph of Scipio is ultimately a tale of balance between glory and humility, victory and exile, greatness and gratitude. It represents a moment when Rome, fragile and reeling, stood tall again because of one man's courage to dream beyond tradition. It was the moment Rome began to think not just of survival, but of destiny. In that golden chariot, beneath the gaze of cheering crowds and watchful senators, Scipio Africanus was more than a general. He was the embodiment of Roman potential, the spark that lit the fire of empire. And though the man would fade into time, his triumph would echo through the ages. Legions of the Eternal Flame. The eternal flame burned at the heart of Rome, an unbroken fire tended by the Vestal Virgins, symbolizing the city's undying spirit. It was more than mere tradition. It was the pulse of the empire, the divine covenant between mortals and gods. But beyond the sacred hearth, beyond the rituals and public pageantry, there were rumors of another flame, one unseen, one hidden, deep beneath the marble stones of the city. This flame, it was said, was guarded not by priestesses, but by warriors. They were not listed in military records, bore no official crests, and received no honors in triumphal processions. They were the legions of the Eternal Flame, a force whispered about in secret, half legend and half truth, sworn to defend not the borders of Rome, but its soul. According to old chronicles found buried in forgotten temples, this order had existed since the time of Numa Pompilius, the second king of Rome. While the legions of Romulus conquered the land, Numa was said to have struck a pact with divine fire, a spark gifted by Vesta herself. From this flame, not only was the hearth kindled, but so too the hearts of chosen guardians, warriors bound by blood and oath to protect Rome from threats beyond swords and armies. These threats came in the form of betrayal, sorcery, omens, and forces not acknowledged by official doctrine. The legions of the Eternal Flame did not wage wars in open fields. They operated in the silence of the Forum after midnight, in the catacombs beneath the Aventine, in the mountain temples where forgotten gods stirred. Only a few citizens ever glimpsed them, and those who did remembered the same details. Red and gold armor, plumed helms that bore no imperial seal, and swords that shimmered faintly even in darkness. It was said that the warriors never aged, or if they did, they passed into flame upon their final breath, their ashes scattered at the base of the ancient altar of Vesta. No funerals, no tombs, only fire. Their recruitment was no ordinary call. No trumpet sounded, no scroll was posted. The chosen were visited in dreams, by a woman clothed in fire, or a voice that spoke through embers. They would awaken with a mark, small, glowing, and warm to the touch, over their heart. From that moment, their lives were no longer their own. They were trained in hidden camps near volcanic springs and sacred groves, instructed not only in combat, but in prophecy, ritual, and the old laws that predated the 12 tables. They could read the flight of birds, interpret the hiss of oil on flame, and detect corruption in a man's words as if it were smoke. Over centuries, the legions acted when the empire could not. They stopped assassins sent by cursed cults, quieted uprisings born of unnatural madness, and sealed ancient vaults unearthed by greedy senators. When Emperor Aurelian restored the temples of the sun, it was said he did so under the silent guidance of these warriors, having been saved from an unseen death during a midnight storm. He never spoke of it publicly, but one night, a curious servant found him kneeling before a brazier in his private chamber, whispering words in a language long dead. When Christianity began its rise, the legions faced a dilemma. Their loyalty was to the flame of Rome, not to any one god. They watched as temples were closed, rituals outlawed, and the gods of their oaths dismissed as myth. Many thought their purpose would end, but the fire remained. It flickered low, but did not go out. The legions adapted, retreating further into secrecy, understanding that their duty was not to preserve the old pantheon, but the essence of Rome itself, its balance, its spirit, its continuity. In the waning years of the Western Empire, As barbarians threatened the gates and emperors fell like brittle leaves, the legions acted more boldly. They protected sacred texts from burning, guided refugees through shadowed paths, and preserved relics too powerful to be left in mortal hands. Some of these they destroyed in fire. Others they sealed in vaults beneath 7 layers of oath and stone. One vault, according to legend, lies beneath the baths of Caracalla, guarded by an eternal flame that has burned uninterrupted for over 1,000 years. Their presence was not always welcome. Some emperors feared them, seeing in them a rival to their own fading power. Others tried to command them, only to be met with silence or disappearance. A few, those wise enough to understand the deeper currents of the world, became allies, even honorary members. It is said that Emperor Julian, the last pagan emperor, was one such man. Before his ill-fated Persian campaign, he consulted the legions in a secret rite beneath the old temple of Apollo. What he saw or learned is unknown, but he rode to battle wearing a gold torque etched with flames, a gift never seen before or after. The legions left no monuments. Their glory was in anonymity, but traces remain, symbols carved in hidden corners of Roman architecture, a flame within a circle, a sword across a laurel branch, a face half shadowed by firelight. These marks, ignored by most, were signs for those who still watched, still waited. There are records of their appearance during the sack of Rome in 410 CE. Amid the chaos, certain buildings remained untouched. Certain artifacts mysteriously vanished before looters arrived. Survivors spoke of figures moving through the smoke, glowing briefly before disappearing. After the fall, the legions did not dissolve. They changed shape, becoming more myth than military. Some believe they guided monks who transcribed the old texts, ensuring the wisdom of the ancients would not be lost. Others say they walked among the knights and scholars of later ages, hidden beneath new names but carrying the same fire in their veins. Every so often, a tale emerges of a warrior in red and gold saving a child from a burning building, or of a man who does not burn while walking through flame. These stories are dismissed as fables, but they carry the scent of something older, something enduring. For what is Rome, if not rebirth? Fire consumes, but it also purifies. The eternal flame does not demand temples or legions to exist. It survives in symbols, in courage, in acts done without need for recognition. And perhaps, somewhere, deep beneath the ruins and dust, the legions still gather, watching, waiting for the time when Rome needs its soul defended once more. Blood and laurel. Victory in Rome was never just about conquest. It was theater, spectacle, and myth woven into the flesh and bone of real men. The laurel wreath, placed on the brow of a general, meant more than triumph. It was an offering to the gods, a symbol of divinely sanctioned power, and a reminder that behind every glory marched the ghost of death. Blood and laurel, inseparable, eternal. Gaius Marcius Lento had earned his laurels in the eastern provinces, crushing a rebellion in the hills of Cilicia. His name was sung by soldiers, etched into the records of the Senate, and offered in prayers by the grateful or the fearful. Rome greeted him with a triumph, a procession down the Via Sacra with caged prisoners, plundered gold, and elephants from distant lands. He stood in his chariot, stoic, the laurel wreath sitting lightly on his head as rose petals rained from the rooftops. But even in that moment of adoration, he heard it, the whisper behind him. Remember, you are mortal. It was not the appointed slave who whispered it, but something older, colder. A chill threaded his spine, and the air tasted of iron. The triumph was supposed to be the pinnacle, the reward. Yet for Gaius, It marked the beginning of something far darker. In the weeks that followed, strange things began to happen. Dreams plagued him, visions of laurels dripping with blood, of Rome burning under a crimson sun, of the Senate chambers filled with hissing serpents wearing togas. He dismissed them as aftershocks of battle trauma, a soldier's guilt. But then the omens began. A statue of Mars cracked in his private shrine. His prized warhorse went mad and hurled itself into the Tiber. The augurs he consulted offered conflicting signs. Some saw promise, others doom. One, an old haruspice brought from Etruria, studied the entrails of a sacrificed ram and fell to his knees, weeping silently before refusing to speak again. Gaius had climbed the Roman ladder of honor by being ruthless but rational. He distrusted mysticism, believed in discipline and control. But the signs eroded his confidence. He found himself returning to the temple of Apollo, leaving silent offerings at the foot of forgotten gods. The laurel wreath from his triumph, which he had kept on a pedestal, began to rot from within, though its leaves appeared fresh. When he touched it, his finger bled. He laughed at first, an accident, a prick of the stem. But the laughter was thin, and it did not last. Then came the summons, a message, written in an ancient script few could read, sealed with black wax. It simply read, "You wear what was never meant to be yours. The gods remember." It was unsigned, but the implication was clear. Gaius had not merely won a war, he had crossed a boundary. In Cilicia, during the final siege, he had desecrated a temple of an old cult, one outlawed even by Roman standards. His men had laughed as they looted it, dragging out golden idols, smashing altars, even sacrificing a priest to send a message. Gaius hadn't stopped them. He'd ordered it, and now, it seemed, something had followed him home. He began to see figures in the periphery of his vision, tall, faceless, crowned with laurels that bled down their shoulders. They stood in corners, behind columns, vanishing when he turned to look. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. His wife fled the villa with their children, fearing the madness that clung to him like smoke. His slaves abandoned him. Only his old comrade, Marcus Varius, remained, refusing to leave his general's side. Marcus had always believed in signs. He told Gaius of an old rite that could cleanse the stain, an offering to the forgotten gods beneath Rome, the ones older than Jupiter and harsher than Pluto. Desperate, Gaius agreed. They descended into the catacombs one night, torch in hand, guided by a one-eyed priest who smelled of ash and spoke only in riddles. The rite involved blood, his own. He cut his palm, let the drops fall on ancient stone, reciting phrases that tasted like dust and fire. For a moment, the darkness lifted, the visions ceased. The wreath no longer bled. Gaius believed himself freed. But it was not cleansing, it was a marking. That night, he awoke to find Marcus hanging in the atrium, eyes wide, mouth agape in silent terror. On the walls were smeared laurel leaves stuck with drying blood. The whisper returned, no longer behind him but beside his bed. "You are not crowned. You are condemned." The Senate, worried by rumors and unrest, stripped him of his command. He was ordered to retire quietly, disappear into the countryside. But wherever he went, the flame of Rome flickered with unease. Crops failed in the villas he passed. Wells turned sour. Dogs howled at his scent. People crossed themselves in the Christian fashion when they saw him, though none could explain why. He became a ghost in his own time, a living reminder that Rome's glory came at a price. Years later, a traveler passing through Capua claimed to have met an old man dressed in a tattered general's cloak, speaking in broken Latin about fire, vengeance, and the gods' hunger. He wore a crown of laurel-scorched black, yet still alive with green veins pulsing in its stems. The traveler swore that when the man removed the wreath, his skull was etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the night. Whether the tale was true or another tavern invention, it lingered. In time, the legend of Gaius Marcius Lento became a cautionary tale for generals. Triumph, it was said, must be balanced. The laurel was not merely a reward, it was a debt paid in unseen ways. For every cheer of the crowd, a whisper in the dark. For every rose petal, a drop of blood. The Republic had long fallen, and the Empire would eventually follow. But blood and laurel remained, woven into every great victory, every oath, every ambition. Rome may burn, rise and burn again, but the gods remember, and they do not forget those who wear their glory without permission. Empire of the Eagle. The eagle soared above the world, wings outstretched over lands that bent the knee to Rome. Not just a bird, but a banner, a prophecy in feathers and bronze. To follow the eagle was to follow conquest, to chase the horizon in the name of an empire that dared to call itself eternal. This was the empire of the eagle, vast, disciplined, and forged in fire. The Aquila, the Roman eagle standard, was more than a military emblem. It was the soul of the legion. Carried into battle by the Aquilifer, a position of sacred duty, the eagle inspired men to fight and die. If the eagle fell, the legion's honor was shattered. To lose it was unthinkable. To recover it, a cause for legend. It was said the gods flew with the eagle, that victory followed in its shadow. Rome's rise was swift and relentless. From the hills of Latium, its legions marched outward, crossing seas and mountains, breaking kings and empires. With the eagle at their head, they conquered the Greeks, the Carthaginians, the Gauls, and beyond. Each victory planted a feather in Rome's wings until her dominion stretched from the cold shores of Britannia to the sun-scorched sands of Africa, from the wild Rhine to the rich waters of the Nile. The eagle became a symbol not just of Rome's military strength, but of its imperium, its right to rule. Emperors embraced the eagle as their own. Statues of golden eagles crowned temples and arches. Standards bearing its form were raised in ceremonies and funerals, their gleam a reminder that Rome's power came from above. The people believed the eagle carried the souls of the emperors to the heavens, where they joined the gods. But no empire soars forever. The eagle, though mighty, faced storms. Rebellions flared on distant frontiers. Parthians captured eagles at Carrhae. Germanic tribes ambushed legions in the Teutoburg forest and left eagles trampled in blood-soaked earth. Yet Rome endured. For every eagle lost, another rose. For every province that resisted, another was made to kneel. Even as Rome transformed, from republic to empire, from marble to decay, the eagle remained. In it, Romans saw not just a bird, but destiny. The empire of the eagle was more than territory. It was law, language, architecture, and the belief that order could rise from chaos under a banner of strength. Centuries later, long after the legions had vanished and the Senate's voice fell silent, the eagle lived on. Charlemagne claimed it. The Holy Roman Empire adopted it. Napoleon wore it on his chest. The double-headed eagle would fly over Byzantium and Russia, a ghost of Rome's ambition. Its wings, like memory, refused to fold. Rome's greatness was not in its size alone, but in its vision. The eagle flew because Romans believed they were destined to rule, not for the sake of conquest, but to bring their order to the world. And so the eagle soars still, in books, in stone, in the echoes of history. For though the empire may fall, the eagle remembers. Brutus, the last republic. He was born into a legacy of resistance. Marcus Junius Brutus, descendant of Lucius Junius Brutus, who had cast out the last Roman king and founded the Republic, carried a name carved in defiance. He was raised not just as a citizen, but as a guardian of liberty. Yet fate would twist his path, placing him in the shadow of the man he would call both friend and tyrant, Julius Caesar. The Roman Republic was faltering. Corruption, class divides, and endless civil wars had frayed its ancient fabric. The Senate, once the soul of Roman governance, had become a stage for power-hungry men. And in that chaos rose Caesar, general, orator, dictator. To many, he was Rome's savior. To Brutus, he was its undoing. Brutus admired Caesar. He had fought at his side, shared in his victories. But admiration was not obedience. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, when he took the title Dictator Perpetuo, Brutus saw not a man saving Rome, but a king in all but name. The Republic, his Republic, could not survive a crown, and so he chose. In secret chambers, with whispers and oaths, Brutus joined the conspiracy, not for vengeance or power, but principle. He became the reluctant blade in the heart of a man he loved, believing he was saving the soul of Rome. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, in the theater of Pompey, Brutus and the senators struck. Caesar fell, his blood pooling beneath the statue of Pompey, and with his last breath, he turned to Brutus and uttered those immortal words, "Et tu, Brute." The tyrant was dead, but Rome did not rejoice. What Brutus envisioned as liberation was seen by many as betrayal. The people mourned Caesar. Riots erupted. The conspirators, rather than being hailed as heroes, fled the city. The republic they hoped to save trembled, leaderless and lost. In the east, Brutus gathered forces, proclaiming the return of republican liberty. Alongside Cassius, he waged war against Caesar's heirs, Octavian and Mark Antony. But the gods had chosen another future for Rome. In 42 BCE, at Philippi, the armies clashed. Brutus fought bravely, but fate was unyielding. Cassius fell first, and when Brutus learned the battle was lost, he chose death over dishonor. He fell upon his sword, whispering, "Virtue, I worshipped you, but you were only a name." Brutus died believing he had failed. The Republic died with him. Yet history is more than victory. Brutus became a symbol, not of success, but of sacrifice, of the man who dared to stand for ideals against impossible odds. To some, he was a murderer. To others, the last true Roman. His name echoed through centuries, invoked by poets and philosophers as the man who chose principle over power. Brutus. The Last Republic is not a tale of triumph. It is a tragedy, a final cry for freedom as the sun set on Roman democracy. And though empire rose from its ashes, the memory of Brutus endures, a flicker of what Rome once was and what it dared to be. The Sword of Vulcan. In the smoldering heart of Mount Etna, where fire sings and stone melts to will, the god Vulcan toiled at his forge. He was the divine smith, the crippled craftsman of Olympus, whose hammer shaped the weapons of gods and heroes alike. But among his many works, shields of stars, thrones of gold, chains for titans, none was more feared or fated than the sword of Vulcan. Forged in an age when the world was young and Rome only a dream yet to be dreamt, the sword was born of fire and fury. Its blade gleamed not with steel, but with molten bronze cooled in sacred water drawn from the Tiber's source. Vulcan poured his divine rage into it, rage at betrayal, at the mockery of his form, At the wars men waged in blind ambition. This was not a weapon of defense. It was destruction given shape. The legends say the sword could cut through marble as though it were air, and when unsheathed, it glowed like a falling star. Fire danced along its edge. One strike could set armies ablaze. It was too powerful, even for the gods. Fearing its misuse, Vulcan sealed it away in a vault beneath the earth, guarded by automatons of bronze and a riddle only the chosen could solve. There it slept, waiting for the mortal who would be worthy, not strong of arm, but of spirit. Centuries passed. Empires rose and crumbled, and then came the age of Rome, when the Republic teetered on the edge of chaos, when generals clawed for power and the gods whispered of an empire to come. The prophecy resurfaced. It spoke of a champion who would awaken the sword, not to conquer, but to restore balance. Some said the chosen one would be born of both war and peace, their blood marked by Mars and Venus, their destiny tied to fire. Whispers grew around Aeneas, the Trojan exile. Others pointed to Romulus, founder of Rome, but the sword did not stir. It waited, patient and eternal. Some believe it was Scipio Africanus who bore it into battle against Hannibal, his hands wrapped in linen to hold its heat. Others say Julius Caesar glimpsed it in a dream before crossing the Rubicon, but dared not seek it. Still others claim the sword was offered to Augustus, but he refused, choosing olive over flame. In every age of crisis, Rome has searched for the sword of Vulcan. It remains the myth of final hope or ultimate ruin, the weapon that could defend the city in her darkest hour, or burn the world in her name. Now, only ash and ruins remain where once empires thundered. But perhaps the sword still waits, buried beneath stone, wrapped in fire, humming with the memory of a god's fury and a nation's fate. For when Rome is reborn, the sword will rise, and the fire of Vulcan will forge history once more. Twilight of the Senate. The Curia Hostilia, once the sacred heart of Roman governance, stood weathered beneath the fading light. Its marble columns, once alive with debate and decision, now echoed with silence and suspicion. The Senate of Rome, proud architect of a republic that had endured for centuries, found itself in decline. Not from invasion or fire, but from within. This was the twilight of the Senate, when the voices of statesmen gave way to the commands of emperors, and liberty dissolved into spectacle. In the days of old, the Senate was Rome's conscience. From the time of the Republic's founding, it was the Senate that guided war and peace, shaped law, and upheld the fragile balance between patrician and plebeian. Men like Cato, Cicero, and Scipio had filled its halls with oratory, conviction, and vision. Power was debated, not decreed. Authority was earned, not inherited. But greatness invited envy, and ambition, once restrained by tradition, became the Republic's undoing. It began with Sulla, who marched his legions on Rome and rewrote the Constitution with blood. It continued with Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar, who carved the Republic into their own private domain. And when Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the Senate crossed a line it could not uncross, allowing fear and faction to override unity. The Ides of March were meant to restore the old ways. The conspirators, daggers in hand, cried, "Sic semper tyrannis," as Caesar bled beneath Pompey's statue. But instead of saving the Senate, they shattered it. Rome did not rejoice. The people mourned Caesar, and the Senate lost the last of its prestige. From the ashes rose Octavian, Caesar's heir. Clever, calculating, and young, he played the Senate like a liar, offering peace while holding a sword. In 27 BCE, he became Augustus, princeps, not king, but something more. The Senate still met, still voted, But now they applauded what had already been decided. They awarded titles, not commands. They became an audience to empire. The twilight deepened under later emperors. Tiberius withdrew into isolation. Caligula mocked the Senate by proposing his horse for consul. Nero had senators executed on whim, their only crime being independence of thought. The Senate remained, a hollow shell wrapped in ceremony. And yet, even in decline, there were moments of defiance. Seneca, Thrasea and Tacitus bore witness to the dignity that once was. They wrote, resisted, and remembered. For in Rome, even twilight cast a long shadow. By the time of Diocletian and Constantine, the Senate had become a relic, more museum than institution. Power flowed from the emperor and the army, not from the forum. The voice of the people was drowned beneath the weight of imperial decree. But the Senate did not die in a single night. It faded, like the last ember of a once great fire. Its ideals, libertas, dignitas, auctoritas, outlived its power, whispering through the centuries to republics yet to come. The twilight of the Senate was not just the end of a political body. It was the setting sun of an age where men ruled not by birthright, but by the strength of their words, and in that fading light, history took a breath before Rome was reborn in empire. The Vestal Flame. In the heart of Rome, where gods and mortals once walked the same streets, there stood a flame that never died. It flickered in the round temple of Vesta, watched day and night by priestesses chosen from noble blood, sworn to chastity and silence. It was the Vestal Flame, more than a mere fire. It was the soul of Rome, the spirit of its people, the heartbeat of a civilization that believed its fate was entwined with divine favor. The Vestal Virgins, 6 in number, were charged with guarding this sacred flame. They were not ordinary priestesses. Chosen between the ages of 6 and 10, they were removed from their families and trained in rites older than memory. For 30 years they served, 10 in learning, 10 in duty, and 10 in teaching. They were bound by a vow of chastity, for theirs was a purity not only of body, but of purpose. To be a Vestal was to carry the weight of Rome's destiny in one's hands. The flame they guarded was no ordinary fire. It represented the hearth of the Roman people, the living link to Vesta, goddess of the home and family. While other gods demanded sacrifice, Vesta asked only for devotion. Her flame, ever burning, symbolized continuity, an empire that would never fall, a city that would never darken. So long as it burned, Rome endured, but should it go out, calamity. The extinguishing of the Vestal Flame was seen as a terrible omen, a rupture in the bond between Rome and the gods. It signaled disorder, divine disfavor, and the threat of ruin. And should the guardians of the flame fail in their sacred duty, the punishment was harsh and unyielding. A Vestal who broke her vow of chastity was considered to have betrayed Rome itself. As the blood of a priestess could not be spilled, she was buried alive in a sealed chamber with a loaf of bread, a lamp, and a few comforts, left to die in darkness, far from the sacred light she once tended. It was not only punishment, it was purification. And yet, despite this severity, the Vestals were among the most revered women in Rome. They sat in places of honor at games and festivals. They were above reproach, their word carrying great legal weight. If a condemned man crossed their path, he could be granted a reprieve. They held the Palladium, the sacred relic said to protect the city. They were not wives or mothers, but something more mysterious, living symbols of Rome's divine protection. The Vestals lived in the House of the Vestals, adjacent to their temple in the Forum Romanum. It was a grand structure, filled with courtyards, gardens, and quiet halls. There, away from the chaos of the streets, they studied, prayed, and kept watch. Each morning, a new fire was struck using friction or sunlight, never from another flame, lest impurity be passed on. The ritual was precise, solemn, and unbroken across centuries. As the Republic gave way to empire, the role of the Vestals shifted but never faded. Emperors honored them. Some, like Augustus, tied their legitimacy to Rome's religious traditions, elevating the Vestals further. Statues of them appeared in forums and temples. Their image was engraved on coins. The fire, undisturbed by civil war or political upheaval, burned on, a quiet testament to Rome's sacred endurance. But nothing lasts forever. In the 4th century CE, as Christianity spread across the empire and pagan practices waned, the flame flickered. Emperors, now converts to the new faith, began to withdraw support for the old gods. Under Theodosius I, the worship of Vesta was officially banned. The temple was closed. The fire, so long untended, died at last, and with it, an age passed into shadow. Even in ruin, the memory of the Vestal flame lingered. Poets wrote of its glow. Historians spoke of its solemn power. The site of the temple, though crumbled, became a place of reverence. The Christian Rome that followed adopted new forms of ritual, but the old fire haunted its foundations. Some say the last of the Vestals wept as the flame was extinguished, tears falling on cold ash. Others claim one kept a secret flame burning in defiance, passing the sacred light from candle to candle, home to home, preserving the last spark of an ancient world. Today, only ruins remain of the Temple of Vesta. Its round foundation and a few standing columns whisper of what once was. But the idea, the symbol, lives on. The flame has become a metaphor for legacy, for spiritual endurance, for Rome itself. Like all sacred things, it belongs not just to history, but to the imagination. The Vestal flame reminds us of what civilizations strive for: continuity, sanctity, and order. In a world of shifting empires and mortal ambition, the flame offered something eternal, a light untouched by time, fed by faith. In tending it, the Vestals gave more than service. They gave Rome its soul. The forgotten centurion. He was never mentioned in the annals of the great. No triumph was held in his name. No statues stood in his honor. Yet his blood soaked the same soil, his sword struck in the same wars, and his heart beat with the same loyalty that built an empire. He was known only as Lucius Varro, a centurion of Rome, forgotten by history, but remembered in the dust, stone, and silence of the empire he helped forge. Lucius was born in the shadow of war in a modest village near Capua, son of a blacksmith and grandson of a slave. He was not noble, not destined for greatness, but Rome, in its boundless hunger, had a place for every man willing to bleed. At 17, he enlisted, marching under the eagle standard into the wild frontiers of Gaul. He was a legionary in Legio ex Fretensis, hardened beneath the northern skies, where the forests whispered with barbarian tongues. He learned to fight in rain and snow, to build camps with frozen hands, and to bury his brothers beneath foreign trees. War, for Lucius, was not glory, it was survival. But in the chaos of the battlefield, he found purpose. And that purpose earned him the vine staff of a centurion. As centurion, Lucius commanded 100 men. To his soldiers, he was father, brother, hammer, and shield. He knew each by name, knew their wounds and their fears. He marched at the front, never behind. His scarred face, marked by a Dacian axe, became legend among new recruits. Follow the scar, they said, and you'll come home. But home never came for Lucius. After Gaul, it was Dacia, then Parthia, then Judea. Rome's reach was endless, and so too was his service. He watched emperors rise and fall, some mad, some brilliant, none remembered in the same way by all. He served under Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, but never bowed to any. His loyalty was not to men, but to Rome itself, the eternal, unshaken ideal. In Judea, during the siege of Jerusalem, he witnessed horrors that haunted even hardened men. The city burned, temples crumbled, and the streets ran red with blood. Lucius held the line as the last defenders fell, his armor ash-streaked and his heart silent. That night, under a crimson moon, he questioned the justice of empire. But duty was louder than doubt. Years passed. Wars blurred together. His hair grayed, his hands stiffened. Yet still he marched, a relic among younger men. The newer recruits looked to him as a legend, a walking myth from the days when Rome still believed in itself. They asked him why he still fought. His answer was always the same: because someone must. But glory is a fickle thing. When he finally fell, not in battle, but to fever in a damp barracks on the edge of Germania, there was no eulogy. No scroll recorded his name. His body was placed in a simple grave marked with a wooden stake, already rotting by winter. His few possessions, an iron gladius, a worn ring, a letter from a woman long dead, were burned or claimed. The empire moved on. Centuries later, when archaeologists unearthed the ruins of a forgotten Roman outpost near the Rhine, they found remnants of an ancient barracks. In its corner, buried beneath rubble and time, was a rusted sword. Etched faintly into its hilt were the letters L.V. nothing else. No family seal, no imperial mark, just two letters. Two initials in a sea of dust. Scholars debated its meaning. Was it a merchant's tool, a guard's backup weapon, or something more? Among the whispers of academia, a quiet story formed, of a centurion lost to time, whose only legacy was a sword and a legend. That story spread. Writers turned it into fable. Painters imagined him at the head of a legion, face lit by fire, eyes set on an unseen horizon. The forgotten centurion, they called him, a symbol of the many who lived, fought, and died in the shadows of Rome's monuments. In modern Rome, where tourists stroll through ruins and wonder at the past, his tale lingers like smoke. Not in museums, but in the silence between columns, in the echo of boots on ancient stone, in the feeling that someone stood here once, not to be remembered, but to hold the world together for just one more day. Lucius Varro never sought immortality, but in being forgotten, he became eternal. For while emperors carved their names into marble, his sacrifice was written in something deeper, in duty, in grit, in the invisible mortar that held the empire's walls intact. Every empire is built not by the famous, but by the faithful. Not by the ones crowned, but by those who carried the weight without praise. Lucius was one of them. And in the quiet corners of history, where light seldom reaches, his flame still flickers. Jupiter's wrath. When mortals forget the gods remind them. It began not with thunder, but with pride. The city of Velitrae, nestled in the Alban hills and proud of its lineage, had grown rich and defiant. Its temples, once filled with incense and offerings, now stood neglected. Its altars to Jupiter Optimus Maximus were cold, its people intoxicated by their own ambition. They praised generals instead of deities, toasted to victory but not to virtue. And in the heavens above, Jupiter, king of the gods, watched with narrowed eyes. For centuries, Jupiter had been the divine architect of order, the father of law, the wielder of lightning. He had gifted Rome her destiny and held chaos at bay with the force of his will. But there was a covenant between mortals and gods, reverence for protection, piety for power. Velitrae had broken this pact. The final insult came when the city erected a colossal statue, not of a god, but of Gaius Varenius, their warlord and consul, arms outstretched like a conquering deity. It towered above the Capitol, bronze shining in the sunlight, where once only sacred flame had burned. Jupiter's fury ignited. From his throne upon the storm-wreathed peak of Olympus Mons, he summoned his storm clouds and loosed his fury across the skies. The heavens split with lightning, and thunder rolled like drums of war. The other gods watched in solemn silence. Mars gripped his spear. Minerva set aside her scroll. Even Neptune stirred in his depths. For when Jupiter rose in wrath, the world trembled. A black storm swept over Velitrae. Crops withered. Rivers overflowed with blood-red silt. The sun vanished behind unnatural clouds, and omens littered the city. Cattle born with two heads, birds flying backwards, statues weeping salt. The people whispered of curses. The priests, long silenced by wealth and pride, fumbled through forgotten rituals, desperate to appease what they had forsaken. Then came the strike. On the seventh night, as the wind howled and the air grew thick with sulfur, a thunderbolt fell from the sky like the judgment of Olympus itself. It struck the statue of Varenius, shattering it into molten ruin. The blast leveled the plaza, killing hundreds. Fires broke out across the city, and yet no rain fell. The sky raged, but offered no relief. Velitrae's senate, pale and trembling, declared days of mourning. Sacrifices were made, bulls slaughtered, gold brought to the blackened temple steps. But Jupiter was not moved by offerings born of fear. He demanded atonement, not bribes. A child was born during the storm, under unnatural signs, his eyes gray as storm clouds, his cry like wind through marble. The augurs declared he bore the mark of divine displeasure. They named him Fulmen, meaning lightning. He was taken to the Sibylline oracle, who confirmed what many feared. He was not a curse, but a message, a living symbol of the god's wrath, and a vessel through which fate would speak. Fulmen grew quickly, too quickly. By age 10, he spoke in tongues unknown, quoted laws older than Rome, and walked among ruins as if he remembered them. His presence unnerved the people. Some worshipped him, others feared him. The priests tried to silence him, but the heavens always responded, thunder rolling whenever he was struck or chained. At 16, he vanished into the woods. He returned 3 years later, clad in a wolfskin, eyes burning with divine fury. He had climbed the forbidden peak of Mons Albanus, stood where mortals should not stand, and there, he claimed, Jupiter had spoken to him. The god had given him a task, to purge Velitrae of its pride, to restore the sacred bond. Fulmen stood before the Senate and gave them one final chance. "Restore the temple," he said, "not with stone, but with humility. Burn your false idols, return to the old ways, and the skies will clear." They laughed, called him mad. They mocked the gods once more. That night, Fulmen walked alone into the heart of the temple and raised his arms to the heavens. And Jupiter answered. A column of lightning, brighter than day, struck the earth. It did not burn. It cleansed. Stone turned to ash, gold to vapor. The palace, the forums, the monuments, all reduced to smoking ruin. But no wind carried the fire. No neighboring city suffered. The wrath was precise, exacting, just. Velitrae was erased, not from maps, but from memory. Only the name survived, spoken in hushed tones as a warning. The land where it once stood grew wild again, and no walls would hold. Trees split in unnatural ways, and birds refused to nest there. Fulman was never seen again. Some say Jupiter took him up to the stars, placing him among the constellations as the storm-bearer, a silent reminder. Others say he walks the earth still, ageless and watching, appearing in places where faith is failing and pride festers. In Rome, the tale of Velitrae was added to the scrolls not as myth, but as caution. For even in an empire of gods and men, there is only one king of heaven, and he does not forget. Jupiter's wrath is not mindless destruction. It is judgment. It is balance, and it always returns when mortals forget to look upward. Iron and ivory. In the age of empire, Rome was a city of contrasts: stone and silk, conquest and ceremony, savagery and grace. None embodied this duality more than the tale whispered in marble halls and battlefield camps alike: the story of iron and ivory. Iron, the blood-forged strength of the legion. Ivory, the pale, precious symbol of peace and opulence. Together, they told the story of a man and a woman, fated to cross paths at the turning point of the Republic, when the old virtues cracked beneath the weight of new ambitions. He was born in the mud of Hispania, to a soldier's widow and the hard discipline of the camp. His name was Marcus Ferentius, though his brothers in arms called him Ferrum. Iron. As a child, he polished his father's battered gladius until it gleamed like silver. As a man, he wielded his own blade in the far reaches of Gaul, Germania, and beyond. He was the kind of centurion the gods themselves seemed to favor. Broad-shouldered, silent, relentless. Marcus was not cruel, but he understood the necessity of fear. He fought for Rome, not out of hunger for glory, but because the world made sense in ranks and orders, in steel and sweat. He knew the cost of peace was violence, and he paid the toll in flesh. The army was his world, and war was his prayer. She came from Alexandria, the great jewel of Egypt, where knowledge and beauty flowed like the Nile. Her name was Albia Selene, daughter of a nobleman and a priestess of Isis. She was raised among scrolls and sculptures, music and mathematics, speaking Greek before Latin, understanding poetry before politics. Her hands, pale and slender as carved ivory, traced the lines of ancient texts and charted the stars above the desert. Albia came to Rome as part of a diplomatic envoy, her father sent to negotiate grain trade and favor with the Senate. She walked the forum like a priestess in exile, watched by merchants and magistrates alike, an image of refinement in a city of iron. Her voice was soft, but her mind was sharper than any blade. Their worlds collided not by fate, but by imperial will. During an uprising on the African coast, Rome called its diplomats home, and Albia was placed under military escort. Marcus, just returned from the Rhine frontier, was ordered to lead the small detachment. He saw her as a burden, delicate, distant, foreign. She saw him as a brute, gruff, inflexible, unimaginative. But danger changes men, and truth is forged under pressure. When bandits struck the caravan outside Sicavenaria, it was Albia's quick thinking that saved them, guiding them off the road into ancient ruins she had studied. When Marcus was wounded protecting the rear, it was Albia who bound his arm with silk and fire-hardened will. For days they traveled on foot through hostile lands, surviving on dried fruit and shared silence. They spoke of Rome, of gods, of dreams, of death. Marcus told her of a brother lost in the woods of Germania, of the dreams that still woke him in sweat. Albia confessed her fear of becoming a pawn in Rome's political chessboard, married off for favor, silenced by tradition. What began in friction became a strange reverence. They were opposites, yes, but like the sword and its scabbard, they fit in a way neither expected. Iron met ivory, and neither was the same again. Back in Rome, their bond became legend and scandal. A centurion and a foreign scholar, it threatened status and stirred rumor. Marcus was offered promotion, on the condition he disavow her. Albia was pressured to return to Egypt, to marry a merchant aligned with senatorial interests. But love, like Rome at its height, does not yield easily. They defied expectations. Quietly, fiercely, they remained together, not in marriage, for such unions were frowned upon, but in loyalty. Albia began teaching Roman daughters in the domus of sympathetic matrons. Marcus took command of a training cohort, shaping the next generation of soldiers not just with drills, but with discipline tempered by wisdom. Their home, a modest villa on the Aventine, became a place where armor hung beside scrolls, where laughter echoed alongside sword clashing, where love was neither wild nor tamed, but earned daily, like battle honors. And then, the fire came. The great fire of Rome, under Nero's reign, devoured the city's heart. Streets turned to ash, temples to ruins. Panic ruled. Marcus, hearing of the blaze while drilling recruits, rushed toward the flames. Albia, refusing to flee, stayed to help evacuate the children she taught. They found each other in the smoke, amid the chaos, guiding civilians out of the inferno, carrying the wounded, shielding the helpless. In the final moments, when a collapsing roof threatened to crush a trapped family, Marcus braced the beam with his body. Albia pulled the children to safety. The building fell. Iron was crushed. Ivory cracked. When the ash settled, they were found side by side, hand in hand, blackened by smoke, flesh seared, eyes closed, but faces calm. Statues would later be raised in their memory, though modest, tucked near the rebuilt library of the Aventine. A sword crossed with a scroll, a soldier and a scholar. Strength and grace, iron and ivory. Their story became a symbol in Rome, not of perfect love, but of balance, of the power born when discipline meets wisdom, when might serves meaning, when two seemingly opposing forces find harmony. For empires do not endure by conquest alone, nor by culture unguarded. They thrive in the union of steel and soul. And though the names of emperors may fade and palaces crumble, the tale of Marcus and Albia, the tale of iron and ivory, echoes still, where hearts long for strength guided by beauty, and where warriors remember that even the hardest blade needs a hand to hold it. Prophecy of the Sibyl. In the ancient world, prophecy was considered one of the most powerful and mysterious means by which the divine interacted with the human realm. Oracles, seers, and diviners were believed to have the ability to communicate with gods, spirits, or the forces of nature to reveal the future. Among these figures, none were as enigmatic and revered as the Sibyls. These prophetesses, scattered across the Mediterranean world, spoke on behalf of the gods, offering cryptic and often foreboding predictions. Of all the Sibyls, the most famous was the Cumaean Sibyl, whose prophecies were said to have been of such importance that they influenced the destiny of Rome itself. The Sibyls were women, often portrayed as figures of great wisdom and mystical power. They were believed to be chosen by the gods, their voices carrying divine insight that could guide rulers, warriors, and ordinary people alike. The Sibyl's role was to act as a mouthpiece for the gods, delivering their words in a trance-like state or through ecstatic visions. While the oracles of Delphi in Greece were the most famous, the Sibyls were considered to be equally significant, if not more so, in Roman and ancient Italic cultures. The most famous Sibyl, the Cumaean Sibyl, lived in the city of Cumae in ancient Italy, near the Bay of Naples. She was considered to be one of the most powerful and influential of all the Sibyls. The Cumaean Sibyl is best known for her prophecies recorded in the Sibylline books, a collection of oracles that were kept by the Romans and consulted during times of crisis. These books were considered so sacred that they were stored in the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill and were consulted by the Roman Senate in times of war, famine, and other national emergencies. According to legend, the Cumaean Sibyl's prophecies were not just vague, mystical utterances, but profound insights into the fate of the Roman Empire. The most famous of her prophecies was one that foretold the rise and fall of Rome itself, a prophecy that spanned centuries and predicted the eventual triumphs and tragic defeats of the Roman people. It was this prophecy that would go on to shape the Roman worldview and its belief in destiny. The most famous version of the prophecy of the Sibyl is found in the Aeneid by the Roman poet Virgil. In this epic poem, the Trojan hero Aeneas seeks guidance from the Cumaean Sibyl to learn of his fate. Aeneas, having fled the ruins of Troy, was destined to found a new city that would become the future Rome. In the Aeneid, the Sibyl plays a pivotal role in Aeneas's journey, guiding him through the underworld to learn about the future of his people. The Sibyl's prophecy, delivered in a cryptic and often fragmented manner, was both a blessing and a warning. It foretold the glory of Rome, but also its struggles, its wars, and the eventual sacrifices that would be required of its leaders. In Book 6 of the Aeneid, the Sibyl guides Aeneas to the gates of the underworld, where he is able to consult the souls of his ancestors. It is here that the Sibyl reveals the fate of Rome, predicting its eventual rise to power and its domination over the Mediterranean. She speaks of the wars to come, the heroes who will shape Rome's destiny, and the triumphs that will be achieved. Yet she also warns of Rome's eventual downfall, hinting at the hardships and destruction that will follow its rise. One of the most significant elements of the Sibyl's prophecy in the Aeneid is the notion of fate and destiny. For the Romans, fate was not a random occurrence, but a divine plan set in motion by the gods. The prophecy of the Sibyl confirmed that Rome was not merely the result of human ambition or military prowess. It was the fulfillment of a cosmic plan, ordained by the gods themselves. The Sibyl's words reminded the Romans that their empire was part of a larger divine order, and that they were bound by fate to fulfill a greater destiny. However, the Sibyl's prophecy was not always seen as a guarantee of success. The Romans knew that fate could be fickle and that their empire was subject to the will of the gods. The Sibylline books, which contained the prophecies of the Sibyls, were consulted during times of national crisis, and the advice contained within them was not always comforting. The Sibyl's words often warned of war, plague, and disaster, and it was up to the Roman leaders to interpret her cryptic messages and take action to avert disaster. The Sibylline books became a central part of Roman religious and political life. They were consulted in times of great uncertainty, such as during the Second Punic War, when the Romans faced the threat of Carthaginian invasion under the general Hannibal. During such crises, the Roman Senate would send delegates to consult the Sibylline books, seeking divine guidance on how to overcome their enemies. The prophecies contained within the books were believed to hold the key to Rome's survival and success, and many of the empire's most significant military and political decisions were made in response to the Sibyl's words. The Sibyl's prophecies were not just about war and conquest. They also touched upon themes of moral and spiritual guidance. The Sibyl was seen as a messenger of the gods, urging the Roman people to maintain piety, humility, and respect for the divine order. In times of national crisis, the Sibyl's words would remind the Romans of the importance of living virtuous lives, of honoring the gods, and of maintaining the moral integrity that had made Rome great. The figure of the Sibyl transcended the boundaries of Roman culture. Her prophecies spread throughout the ancient world, and many cultures adopted the concept of the Sibyl as a symbol of divine wisdom. In Greece, for example, the Sibyl was often associated with the goddess Apollo, who was the god of prophecy, music, and healing. The Greeks believed that the Sibyls were able to tap into Apollo's divine knowledge and communicate his will to humanity. In later centuries, the Sibyl became a powerful symbol in Christian thought, as the early church sought to reconcile ancient pagan traditions with its own emerging religious beliefs. Early Christian writers, such as the Church Fathers, sought to interpret the prophecies of the Sibyls in light of Christian doctrine, viewing them as precursors to the coming of Christ. The idea that the Sibyls had foretold the coming of a Savior became a popular theme in medieval and Renaissance art and literature, where the Sibyls were often depicted as wise women who foretold the birth of Christ and the salvation of humanity. As Christianity spread across the Roman Empire, the role of the Sibyl diminished, but her legacy lived on. The Christian Church sought to suppress the pagan practices associated with the Sibyls, but the idea of divine prophecy and revelation continued to resonate throughout the centuries. In the Renaissance, the Sibyl was reinterpreted as a figure of wisdom and insight, often portrayed in works of art and literature as a symbol of humanity's desire to understand the divine. The prophecy of the Sibyl continues to fascinate historians, scholars, and artists to this day. The Sibyl's ability to bridge the worlds of the human and the divine, to offer glimpses into the future while remaining shrouded in mystery, has made her one of the most enduring figures of ancient prophecy. Her words, whether spoken through the Cumaean Sibyl, the Erymanthian Sibyl, or others, continue to echo through time, reminding us of the ancient world's belief in fate, divine intervention, and the power of prophecy. As a symbol of prophecy, the Sibyl's legacy has transcended time and culture. Her ability to channel the divine will, to predict the future, and to shape the course of human history has left an indelible mark on the imagination. Whether in ancient Rome or in the artistic and intellectual movements of later centuries, the prophecy of the Sibyl remains a powerful reminder of the eternal search for meaning, truth, and guidance from the divine. Lupa's legacy. In the heart of Roman mythology lies a tale both wild and wondrous, the story of Lupa, the she-wolf who nurtured the founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus. More than just a mythic creature, Lupa became a symbol of strength, protection, and the enduring spirit of Rome itself. Her legacy lives on not only in legend, but in art, politics, and the collective identity of a civilization that once ruled much of the known world. The story begins with the twins, Romulus and Remus, sons of the Vestal Virgin Rhea Silvia and the god Mars. After their birth, the twins were sentenced to death by their great-uncle Amulius, who feared their claim to the throne. Placed in a basket and set adrift on the Tiber River, the infants' fate seemed sealed. But the river carried them to safety, where they were discovered at the base of the Palatine Hill by a she-wolf, Lupa. Rather than harming the boys, Lupa suckled and cared for them as if they were her own. She provided warmth and nourishment until they were found by a shepherd named Faustulus, who, along with his wife, raised them to adulthood. Romulus and Remus would eventually overthrow Amulius, restore their grandfather to the throne, and go on to found the city of Rome, Romulus becoming its first king after a tragic conflict with his brother. But Lupa's role in the myth goes beyond maternal instinct. In a culture where wild animals were often feared or revered, the image of a wolf nurturing human children was powerful and provocative. She represented the raw, untamed energy of nature, an energy that helped forge the very founders of Rome. The wolf was not domesticated or subdued, but honored for her strength, loyalty, and primal wisdom. Over time, the image of Lupa and the twins became one of the most enduring symbols of Rome. The bronze statue, known as the Capitoline Wolf, believed to have been crafted in the Etruscan era and later embellished with Renaissance editions of Romulus and Remus, captures this iconic scene. The statue has stood as a cultural and political emblem, representing the mythic origins and resilience of the Roman people. Lupa's legacy also carried a deeper symbolic meaning. She embodied the idea that greatness can rise from humble, even savage beginnings. The founders of Rome were not born into comfort. They were born into danger, raised in the wild, and shaped by survival. Their destiny was forged through hardship, guided by divine will and nature's fierce compassion. In later centuries, Lupa continued to inspire interpretations. Christian Rome reinterpreted her story as a testament to divine providence. How even pagan myths could unknowingly point to a higher truth. Meanwhile, poets and historians use the tale to explore themes of fate, family, and the origins of civilization. Today, Lupa remains a symbol of Rome's ancient soul. Her image is found on coins, monuments, and crests, echoing through history as a reminder of the city's fierce beginnings. Lupa's legacy is not just that of a mythical wolf, it is the story of how wildness, instinct, and maternal strength helped shape one of the greatest empires in history. The Curse of Carthage. The Curse of Carthage is a phrase that captures the tragic downfall of one of the ancient world's greatest cities. Once a thriving maritime power, Carthage stood as a formidable rival to Rome during the early centuries of the Republic. Its legacy is one of brilliance, bloodshed, and ultimately destruction, haunted by a so-called curse that seemed to seal its fate. Rooted in history, legend, and political vengeance, the story of Carthage's doom has fascinated generations. Carthage was founded by Phoenician settlers from Tyre around the 9th century BCE in what is now modern-day Tunisia. Its strategic location along the Mediterranean allowed it to grow into a wealthy and powerful city-state, known for its advanced naval capabilities, commerce, and innovation. However, Carthage's rise would eventually bring it into direct conflict with the emerging power of Rome. The rivalry between Rome and Carthage culminated in the infamous Punic Wars, a series of 3 brutal conflicts fought over more than a century. The most legendary of these was the Second Punic War, marked by the genius of Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, who famously crossed the Alps with war elephants to strike fear into the heart of Rome. Though Hannibal achieved significant victories, including the catastrophic Roman defeat at Cannae, he was ultimately unable to conquer Rome itself. After years of warfare, Carthage was weakened but not destroyed. However, it was the Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, that sealed its fate. By this time, Rome's leaders, especially the senator Cato the Elder, had developed an almost obsessive hatred for the city. Cato famously ended his speeches with the phrase, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. In 146 BCE, Roman forces besieged the city, and after a brutal battle, they razed it to the ground. According to some sources, the Romans enacted a symbolic curse. They supposedly sowed salt into the fields of Carthage to ensure nothing would grow again. A gesture of total annihilation. Though modern historians debate the truth of this act, the legend endures, serving as a dramatic image of Rome's vengeance and the city's utter ruin. The Curse of Carthage can be interpreted in multiple ways. It was certainly a political and military curse, the result of being Rome's greatest threat. But it also came to symbolize the idea that greatness, if feared or envied, could invite doom. Carthage's advanced culture and independence made it both admired and hated. In the Roman mindset, its destruction was not just a necessity, it was a warning to others. Yet the story didn't end in ashes. Julius Caesar later refounded Carthage as a Roman colony in 44 BCE, and it eventually became one of the most important cities in Roman Africa. Despite the curse, Carthage rose again, though not as the proud Phoenician capital it once was, but as a Roman city. The Curse of Carthage is a tale of power, pride, and relentless rivalry. It reminds us how political hatred and fear can lead to the total erasure of a civilization. And yet, it also shows how memory and legacy endure, even after fire and salt. In history, as in myth, Carthage's fall still echoes with tragedy and a strange, haunting sense of justice. The blood of Cincinnatus. The name Cincinnatus evokes the image of a virtuous Roman statesman who embodied humility, duty, and selfless service. Lucius Quinctius. Cincinnatus, a retired farmer turned reluctant dictator, became a symbol of republican virtue, called from his plow to save Rome, and then returning to his fields once the crisis had passed. His story has transcended ancient history, shaping ideals of leadership and civic responsibility for centuries. But the phrase, "the blood of Cincinnatus," speaks not only of lineage or ancestry, it refers to the legacy of leadership grounded in integrity, sacrifice, and the defense of liberty. Cincinnatus lived in the 5th century BCE during a volatile period in Roman history. Rome was not yet an empire, but a fledgling republic surrounded by enemies and plagued by internal strife. According to legend, in 458 BCE, the Roman Senate appointed Cincinnatus as dictator, a role of absolute power during emergencies, when the Roman army was threatened by invading tribes. At the time, he was plowing his small farm. Upon receiving the Senate's summons, he left his field, donned his toga, and accepted the mantle of leadership. Cincinnatus swiftly led Rome to victory in just 16 days. Then, with the war won and his duty fulfilled, he stunned the city by relinquishing power and returning to his modest life. This act of restraint and humility made him a model of civic virtue, particularly in a culture where power was often hoarded and abused. The blood of Cincinnatus thus became a metaphor for a certain kind of leader, one who wields authority not for personal gain, but for the good of the people, and who knows when to step aside. It's not about noble bloodlines in the traditional sense, but rather about a moral lineage, a spirit of selfless service passed down through the ages. In later centuries, especially during the Enlightenment and the founding of modern republics, Cincinnatus was resurrected as an icon of ideal leadership. In the United States, for instance, George Washington was frequently compared to Cincinnatus. Like his Roman counterpart, Washington was a general who returned to private life after victory, and again after serving as the first president. In fact, the Society of the Cincinnati, founded in 1783, honored that legacy, with members drawn from officers of the Continental Army who committed to uphold the principles of republicanism. The phrase, "the blood of Cincinnatus," continues to carry weight today. It symbolizes the idea that greatness does not come from ambition alone, but from integrity, discipline, and service. It reminds us that the best leaders are often those who do not seek power, but accept it out of duty, and who are willing to give it up for the greater good. In a modern world often marked by power struggles and political ambition, the legacy of Cincinnatus stands as a timeless standard. His blood is not confined to Rome, nor to any one nation. It lives on wherever leaders act with honor, serve with humility, and leave behind not monuments to themselves, but stronger, freer societies. The Gaul Wars Chronicle. The Gaul Wars Chronicle refers to the dramatic and bloody series of campaigns led by Julius Caesar from 58 to 50 BCE, known formally as the Commentarii de Bello Gallico, or the Gallic Wars. More than just a military conquest, the Gaul Wars shaped the course of Western history, transforming Julius Caesar from a Roman general into a rising political force and bringing vast new territories under Roman control. Chronicled by Caesar himself, the narrative remains a fascinating blend of propaganda, military strategy, and cultural insight. Gaul, a region roughly corresponding to modern-day France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands, was home to a collection of independent tribes, each with its own leaders, customs, and rivalries. Though diverse, they shared a common Celtic heritage and a fierce resistance to foreign domination. Caesar, seeing both opportunity and political necessity, launched his campaign under the pretext of defending Roman allies and restoring order. The Gaul Wars Chronicle opens with Caesar's famous line, Gallia est omnis divisa in partes tres. All Gaul is divided into 3 parts. This simple declaration set the tone for a systematic conquest. Over the course of 8 years, Caesar subdued powerful Gallic tribes including the Helvetii, Belgae, and Nervii, forging a reputation for tactical brilliance and unshakable discipline. One of the most legendary episodes in the Chronicle is the Siege of Alesia in 52 BCE, where Caesar faced the united Gallic tribes under the charismatic leader Vercingetorix. Outnumbered and surrounded, Caesar constructed massive fortifications, both facing inward and outward, trapping the Gallic army inside and repelling reinforcements from outside. It was a masterpiece of engineering and strategy, ending with Vercingetorix's surrender and the collapse of Gallic resistance. Yet the Chronicle is more than a record of military victories. It's also a carefully crafted piece of self-promotion. Caesar wrote in the third person, presenting himself as a rational, fair, and reluctant conqueror. He emphasized the savagery and instability of the Gauls while highlighting Rome's order and civilization. In reality, his campaign was brutal. Massacres, forced migrations, and the selling of entire populations into slavery were not uncommon. But for Roman audiences, the Chronicle was a testament to Caesar's genius and the glory of Rome. The Gaul Wars also had deep political implications. Back in Rome, Caesar's growing power alarmed the Senate. His military success, wealth from plunder, and popularity with the people made him a threat to the established order. When he crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, a direct challenge to Roman law, civil war erupted, ultimately leading to the end of the Roman Republic and the rise of the empire. Today, the Gaul Wars Chronicle stands as one of the most important historical and literary works from antiquity. It offers not only a glimpse into Roman military tactics and governance, but also into how history can be shaped by those who write it. Whether seen as a brilliant commander or a ruthless imperialist, Caesar's narrative leaves no doubt about the scale and impact of the Gallic Wars. The legacy of these wars is still felt across Europe, where Roman roads, language, and law took root, seeds sown in blood, chronicled by the hand of the conqueror himself. The Tides of Tiber. The Tiber River, or Tevere in Italian, has been the lifeblood of Rome for millennia. Its waters have flowed through the heart of Italy, shaping the landscape, culture, and history of one of the most influential civilizations the world has ever known. To understand the story of Rome itself, one must understand the Tiber, its currents, its significance, and the profound role it played in the rise of the Roman Empire. The source of life and the foundation of Rome. The Tiber is Italy's second longest river, flowing 405 kilometers from its source in the Apennine Mountains to the Tyrrhenian Sea. It cuts through the heart of the Italian peninsula, passing through various towns and cities, but none more significant than Rome. The Tiber is central to the mythology of Rome's founding, with ancient stories linking the river to the survival and destiny of the city's legendary founders, Romulus and Remus. According to Roman mythology, Romulus and Remus, the twin sons of the god Mars and the Vestal virgin Rhea Silvia, were abandoned by their mother on the banks of the Tiber. As infants, they were left to die in the wilderness but were miraculously saved by a she-wolf, Lupa, who nursed them back to health. The river itself, in this context, becomes a symbol of Rome's resilience and divine favor. The legend emphasizes the river's role as both a provider and protector, a sacred force that played a pivotal role in the city's birth. The river as Rome's gateway and lifeblood. In antiquity, the Tiber was not just a geographical feature. It was Rome's main thoroughfare for trade, travel, and communication. The city of Rome grew up along the river's banks, with its strategic location providing access to vital resources and connecting the burgeoning metropolis to other parts of Italy and the Mediterranean world. The river's waters facilitated the movement of people and goods, particularly during the early days of the Republic, when Rome's expansion was heavily reliant on its control of waterways. The Tiber also had practical value as a natural defense barrier. Rome's location on its banks provided a point of control over the river, allowing the Romans to monitor and regulate traffic. It was a critical element in the city's military, economic, and political operations. The river was a symbol of Roman power, not only in the sense of how it nourished and sustained the people, but also in how it allowed Rome to project influence and dominate the surrounding regions. The Tiber's role in Roman religion and mythology. The Tiber was revered by the Romans not only for its practical importance, but also for its religious significance. As the river that nurtured the founding of Rome, it was seen as a divine force, a godly entity that required respect and ritual. In ancient Rome, many rivers were deified, and the Tiber was no exception. The river was personified as a god, Tiberinus, who was associated with fertility, abundance, and the protection of the city. Rituals and sacrifices were often conducted in honor of Tiberinus to ensure the river's continued favor. Tiberinus was linked with the agricultural cycles of Rome, and by extension, the prosperity of the people. Romans believed that maintaining good relations with the river god ensured that Rome's harvests would be plentiful and that the city would remain secure against floods or other disasters. The Sacra Tiberina, a set of rituals dedicated to the river, involved offerings thrown into the Tiber to appease its divine presence. These ceremonies were an essential part of Rome's broader religious calendar and exemplified the Romans' belief in the power of the natural world to influence their lives. The Tiber's fluctuating role, a symbol of Rome's power and fragility. The Tiber's relationship with the city of Rome was not always one of harmony. Over the centuries, the river's tides, floods, and course changes came to symbolize the unpredictable and at times destructive forces of nature. The river's yearly flooding was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, the floods replenished the soil with nutrient-rich silt, ensuring Rome's agricultural success. On the other, they could cause catastrophic damage to the city's infrastructure, flooding homes, temples, and marketplaces. The most famous of these floods occurred in 14 BCE, when the Tiber rose dramatically and inundated parts of Rome. The flood was seen as a manifestation of the gods' displeasure, and it left a lasting impression on the Roman psyche. It underscored the fact that despite their great power, the Romans were not immune to the whims of nature. The cycle of prosperity and destruction that the Tiber symbolized echoed the rise and fall of empires throughout history. Interestingly, the river's flooding also had political implications. Roman emperors and officials often used large-scale projects to control and harness the river's flow. Dams, embankments, and bridges were constructed to limit the damage of floods, and such works were often used to demonstrate imperial power and foresight. One of the most famous of these efforts was the construction of the Pons Fabricius, an ancient bridge still standing today, which helped stabilize the river's course in Rome. The decline of the Tiber's significance. As the Roman Empire expanded and evolved, the Tiber's centrality to the city began to wane. While still an important commercial route, the increasing dominance of the Mediterranean Sea as a trade route began to overshadow the river's importance. The Roman Empire's shift from a city-state to an empire spread its power across vast territories, and Rome's role as a maritime power grew, reducing the dependency on the river for transportation and communication. Moreover, as the empire declined, so too did the infrastructure that had supported the Tiber's role in Roman life. The complex system of aqueducts, bridges, and embankments began to deteriorate, and with it, the management of the river. The Tiber, once a symbol of the empire's might and technological prowess, became more of a symbolic remnant of Rome's past greatness. During the medieval and Renaissance periods, the river's role shifted again. While it remained an important landmark in the city's layout, it no longer held the same economic or military significance. Nevertheless, the Tiber continued to shape the cultural and artistic heritage of Rome. The beauty of the river and its banks inspired countless artists, poets, and writers over the centuries, who reflected on the river's symbolism as a connector between the past and the present, the earthly and the divine. The tides of Tiber in modern times. In modern times, the Tiber remains an important aspect of Rome's identity, though its role has changed dramatically. Today, it serves more as a historical and cultural landmark than a vital lifeline for trade. The river's tides still affect the city, though less dramatically than in ancient times, and it is now primarily a point of tourism and reflection rather than commerce or defense. The Tiber continues to evoke powerful imagery in the modern consciousness, symbolizing the eternal nature of Rome itself. The river flows through the heart of the city, its waters a reminder of the city's complex and multifaceted history, of both its greatness and its vulnerability. Today, the Tiber is a symbol of Rome's continuity, connecting the ancient past with the vibrant, living city of the present. The banks of the Tiber are now lined with picturesque bridges, cafes, and promenades. The river's tides may no longer shape the political or military fortunes of Rome, but its presence remains a central feature of the city's landscape. The Tiber is not merely a physical entity, but a metaphor for the constant flow of time, carrying with it the memory of Rome's rise and fall, its triumphs and tribulations. Just as the tides of the Tiber once shaped the destiny of a mighty empire, they now serve as a reminder of the enduring legacy of Rome, an eternal city, forever in flux. Shadow over Capitoline Hill. Capitoline Hill, the smallest but most sacred of Rome's 7 hills, has long stood as a symbol of authority, divinity, and the soul of the Roman state. Crowned with temples, palaces, and the great tabularium, it was the political and religious heart of the ancient city. From its heights, emperors made proclamations, gods were honored, and laws were inscribed for the people. Yet, even in a place of such grandeur, darkness crept over the marble steps and columns, a shadow that whispered of betrayal, ambition, and the fragility of power. The phrase "shadow over Capitoline Hill" evokes this duality, a golden peak undercut by secrets and silent struggles. To understand the metaphorical shadow that hung over Capitoline Hill, one must first grasp its brilliance. In Rome's earliest days, the hill was the site of the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the chief god of the Roman pantheon. The temple loomed over the city, an eternal guardian and a reminder that the power of Rome was divinely sanctioned. Surrounding the temple were altars, archives, and places where senators debated the future of the Republic and later, the Empire. This hill was more than geography. It was ideology cast in stone. It represented order, control, and permanence. Yet it was also a place where the dangers of absolute power festered. The very institutions built to protect the Republic often became instruments of tyranny, and the divine mandate invoked on the hilltop was used to justify conquest, suppression, and personal ambition. Perhaps the most famous shadow to fall over Capitoline Hill was cast on the Ides of March in 44 BCE, when Julius Caesar was assassinated. Though the act took place in the theater of Pompey, its echoes thundered up to the Capitoline. Caesar, a man who had once paraded triumphantly through the city after conquering Gaul, had become too powerful, too divine in his own right. The Senate, the very institution he had sought to dominate, turned against him. What followed was not a return to the old republic, as the conspirators had hoped, but a descent into civil war, leading to the rise of Augustus and the birth of the Roman Empire. The ideals once debated on Capitoline Hill were replaced by imperial decree. From then on, emperors ruled as gods, their faces stamped on coins, their words law. The shadow had deepened, not through chaos, but through the chilling calm of autocracy. Romans were highly superstitious, and Capitoline Hill, sacred as it was, became a theater for ominous signs and disturbing portents. Historians like Livy and Suetonius wrote of strange events: lightning striking Jupiter's temple, statues weeping blood, flocks of birds flying in reverse patterns above the Senate. These were not merely natural phenomena, they were messages, warnings from the gods. Many Romans believed that when the Capitoline showed signs of imbalance, it foreshadowed trouble for the entire state. During Nero's reign, for instance, a statue of Jupiter was reportedly damaged in an earthquake. Nero, obsessed with his image and legacy, took it as a personal omen. His reign, marked by paranoia and cruelty, fed the growing sense that the gods had turned their gaze away from the eternal city. The grandeur of the hill, once a beacon of divine favor, now loomed like a silent, watching specter. Capitoline Hill was also the seat of bureaucracy and the hidden machinery of the Roman state. Beneath the surface of rituals and official ceremonies, plots were spun in whispered tones. Advisors, scribes, and praetorian guards all played their roles in shaping the direction of the empire. Loyalty was often fleeting, and assassinations, both literal and political, were common. The tabularium, located on the hill, stored Rome's official records. Here, the history of the Republic and the deeds of emperors were etched and preserved. Yet, just as easily as truths were recorded, they could be altered or hidden. History was not immune to manipulation. In the shadow of Capitoline Hill, truth itself became negotiable. As Rome transitioned from a pagan empire to a Christian state under Constantine and his successors, the religious character of Capitoline Hill underwent a transformation. The temples were gradually abandoned or converted, and Christian symbols began to replace pagan ones. Still, the memory of the hill's divine past lingered, and with it, an unease. Christian Rome carried its own shadows. Power shifted from emperors to bishops, and later, to popes. Capitoline Hill, once the domain of Jupiter, became associated with earthly and spiritual authority alike. The buildings may have changed, but the ambitions remained. The Renaissance revived the hill's importance when Michelangelo redesigned its layout under the patronage of Pope Paul III, reinforcing its symbolic power in a new age. Even in modern times, Capitoline Hill continues to be a symbol of Roman identity. It houses the Musei Capitolini, home to Rome's greatest artistic and historical treasures, and remains a site of civic events and political life. But the shadow lingers, not of imminent doom, but of reflection. Capitoline Hill reminds us that even the most powerful civilizations are vulnerable to internal decay, moral ambiguity, and the corruption of ideals. In literature and art, the hill has often served as a backdrop for stories of ambition and downfall. Writers have imagined emperors pacing its stones, contemplating the weight of destiny, and rebels watching from afar, dreaming of a better world. The shadow is not always evil. It can be memory, conscience, or the reminder of human limitation. Capitoline Hill stands at the crossroads of glory and gloom. It represents the highest aspirations of a people who sought to build an empire guided by law and divinity. But it also stands as a testament to the fragility of those ideals when tested by greed, fear, and ambition. The shadow over Capitoline Hill is not just about what happened there. It's about what it means. It's about the tension between light and darkness, between public virtue and private vice, between the marble facade and the shadows it casts. As long as Rome stands, the hill will stand too, a monument to both greatness and the ghosts that greatness leaves behind. The eagle and the underworld. The eagle, symbol of Rome, soared above battlefields, palaces, and provinces, a golden emblem of divine right and imperial power. It was more than a military standard. It was the soul of a legion, a beacon of glory, and the ever-watchful eye of Jupiter himself. Wherever the eagle flew, it announced the presence of Rome, its laws, its might, and its gods. But what happens when that eagle descends? Not into battle, but into the shadows beneath the empire, into the underworld of Rome's own making? There lies a different story, one seldom told in marble or inscribed on tablets. It is a story of spies, betrayal, forgotten gods, secret rites, and those who operated below the surface while the eagle watched from above. The Roman underworld was not just mythological. Beneath the city itself sprawled a network of tunnels, catacombs, and chambers where the empire's unseen machinery churned in silence. Hidden from view were the slave quarters, the cells of political prisoners, and the storerooms where wealth and secrets were hoarded. In these places, the reach of the Senate and the emperor felt different. Less divine, more human, more brutal. The eagle may have adorned the standards in the forum, but its shadow was long and deep, touching those whom Rome preferred to forget. In the mythology of the Romans, the underworld was ruled by Pluto, and to enter was to step beyond the reach of light and law. Yet, for many in the actual city, this descent was literal. Runaway slaves, dissidents, and cultists of forbidden gods found refuge in the dark. In the lower districts, whispers replaced speeches, and knives spoke louder than decrees. These underlayers teemed with people who knew how to vanish, how to trade in secrets, and how to survive beneath the weight of marble palaces and triumphal arches. There were also those in power who descended willingly. Spies in service to the emperor slipped into these shadows, not to rule, but to observe. The frumentarii, a kind of early secret police, operated with quiet efficiency. Wearing civilian clothes, they infiltrated taverns and temples, reporting on potential threats to the stability of the state. Their presence reminded the people that the eagle, though high above, could see even into the underworld. Their role blurred the lines between protector and predator, and their loyalties were often ambiguous, tied less to law and more to whoever held power at the time. Religions outlawed by Roman decree often flourished in secret. Cults of Isis, Mithras, and even the rising sect of Christians gathered in crypts and basements, holding ceremonies by lamplight. They invoked gods foreign and old, gods with faces the Senate could not control. For these worshippers, the eagle represented a false god, a tyranny wrapped in bronze and tradition. To defy it was not merely rebellion, but spiritual liberation. And so, the underworld became both sanctuary and battlefield. Occasionally, the eagle itself was lost to the shadows. In 9 CE, 3 Roman legions were slaughtered in the Teutoburg forest, their eagles captured by Germanic tribes. The loss was more than symbolic, it was catastrophic. Rome mourned as if the gods themselves had fallen. Years later, Emperor Augustus would recover some of the standards, parading them through the city in solemn ceremony. It was an attempt to reclaim not just military honor, but metaphysical order. The eagle had been to the underworld and returned, but the underworld was not always distant or buried. It coexisted with the upper world in more ways than one. Corruption slithered through the ranks of governors, senators, and even emperors. Deals were struck in shadowed halls, poison was poured into goblets, and betrayal often wore the mask of friendship. The underworld was as much psychological as it was physical, a place where ambition devoured virtue and where fear reigned behind closed doors. Emperor Domitian, known for his cruelty and paranoia, filled the Palatine Hill with spies and torturers. He believed that conspirators waited in every corridor, that Rome's glory hid rot beneath its marble skin. His reign was consumed by fear of the underworld, the one within and the one beneath. Eventually, his own court turned on him, and he was assassinated in his own palace. The eagle on his standards did not save him. Power, once untouchable, had fallen prey to the very darkness it had tried to dominate, and yet the eagle endured. Emperors came and went, cities rose and fell, but the symbol remained. When Constantine later rose to power and turned his eyes toward Christianity, the eagle began to evolve. No longer solely a symbol of Rome's pagan past, it adapted. Even into the medieval period, the eagle continued to represent empire, whether Roman, Byzantine, or Holy Roman. Its talons reached into the future, while its shadow still clung to the past. In modern times, archaeologists unearth pieces of the Roman underworld, broken amphorae, mosaics beneath villas, catacombs filled with frescoes of saints and martyrs. These remnants speak not only of what Rome built above the ground, but of what it concealed beneath. Tourists walk the Forum and admire the grandeur of the temples, but few imagine the hidden rooms below, where whispers shape the fates of nations. The eagle and the underworld are not opposites. They are two halves of Rome's soul. One declares, one conceals. One flies, the other burrows. Together, they created a civilization capable of awe-inspiring beauty and chilling cruelty. Rome's greatness was never just in its conquests or roads or language. It was in its contradictions, in its gods and its ghosts, its ideals and its betrayals. To follow the eagle is to chase glory. To walk the underworld is to confront truth. Between them lies Rome, not a city of marble alone, but of shadow and light, ambition and consequence. In understanding both, one begins to understand the empire itself. Neptune's vengeance. Neptune, the ancient Roman god of the sea, was one of the most powerful deities in the Roman pantheon, commanding the vast, unpredictable, and often destructive forces of the oceans. His domain extended over both the calm seas and the tempestuous waters, making him a figure of immense power and influence. As the god who ruled over the oceans, Neptune's wrath, when provoked, could be terrifying and unforgiving. Neptune's vengeance was a force that no mortal could escape. In Roman mythology, Neptune is often depicted as a muscular, mature god, holding a trident, a symbol of his authority over the seas. His counterpart in Greek mythology is Poseidon, And like Poseidon, Neptune controlled not only the oceans, but also the rivers, lakes, and even earthquakes. He was revered by sailors, fishermen, and those whose livelihoods depended on the sea. At the same time, he was feared by those who crossed him or angered him. His vengeance was swift, and his ability to stir the seas into violent storms made him a god to be both worshipped and appeased. Neptune's vengeance was rooted in the unpredictable and dangerous nature of the seas. In Roman times, the Mediterranean was vital for trade, communication, and warfare, yet it was equally fraught with peril. Storms could appear suddenly, destroying entire fleets or leaving entire regions isolated for months. Thus, Neptune was both a protector and a terrifying force of nature. Romans understood that the gods, in their divine unpredictability, could offer both blessing and curse in equal measure. Neptune's anger was often invoked in times of naval conflict, when the tides of war were uncertain. Roman naval commanders, like their Greek predecessors, understood the deep connection between the sea and the gods. Before embarking on a major naval campaign, it was customary to offer sacrifices to Neptune, hoping to earn his favor. In the event of a miscalculation or failure, however, the wrath of Neptune could prove disastrous. Storms at sea, unexpected waves, and disastrous shipwrecks were often attributed to Neptune's displeasure, and they were seen as divine punishment for hubris, overconfidence, or disrespect. Though Neptune is primarily a Roman deity, his mythological counterpart Poseidon features in one of the most famous tales of divine vengeance in ancient literature, the story of Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey. Poseidon's anger towards Odysseus is a classic example of a god's wrath upon a mortal for the sin of hubris and disrespect. Odysseus, the hero of the Trojan War and the protagonist of Homer's epic, famously blinded Polyphemus, the Cyclops and son of Poseidon. Polyphemus had trapped Odysseus and his men in his cave, and the hero tricked the Cyclops by getting him drunk and then blinding him in his sleep. This act of defiance against a god's son incited Poseidon's wrath. The sea god vowed to make Odysseus's journey home as long and treacherous as possible. He sent violent storms and raging winds to delay the hero's return to Ithaca, causing shipwrecks and the deaths of many of Odysseus's men. In this story, Poseidon's vengeance exemplifies the uncontrollable and capricious nature of the sea. No matter how clever or brave Odysseus was, he could not escape the wrath of a god who controlled the seas. While Odysseus's cunning and bravery eventually led him to overcome Poseidon's challenges, the story of Neptune's wrath, in its Roman form, carried a similar warning. The sea could never truly be tamed, and the gods could not be ignored without consequence. In the Roman world, Neptune's vengeance was not only a mythological concept, but a political and military reality. The Romans, especially during the Republic and early Empire, were an ambitious seafaring people. Naval warfare played a crucial role in the expansion and consolidation of Roman power, particularly during the Punic Wars against Carthage, which were fought for control of the Western Mediterranean. The Romans, though initially inferior in naval power, eventually overcame their Carthaginian rivals by building formidable fleets and mastering naval tactics. However, as in the tale of Odysseus, the power of the sea was not to be underestimated. The Battle of Cape Ecnomus in 256 BCE, one of the largest naval battles in history, saw the Romans face off against the Carthaginian fleet. After initial success, a massive storm swept across the Roman fleet, causing significant losses. While the storm was natural, it was seen by many as a sign of Neptune's power and warning. The Romans had taken to the seas, challenging the might of the gods. Such incidents, though common in ancient naval warfare, reinforced the belief that Neptune's vengeance was real. and it could not be outrun by human ambition. In times of political instability, Neptune's wrath was often invoked as a metaphor for the chaos that could overtake Rome if its leaders failed to respect the divine balance. The unpredictability of the sea mirrored the instability in Roman politics, where civil wars, uprisings, and the fall of emperors seemed to come as suddenly as a storm on the open water. A ruler's hubris or failure to maintain divine favor could lead to Rome's downfall, just as a captain's failure to appease Neptune could lead to the loss of an entire fleet. The rise of the Roman Empire itself could be seen as a direct challenge to Neptune's domain. As the Roman legions expanded their reach across the Mediterranean, they asserted control over both the land and the seas. Yet with such expansion came greater responsibilities. The Romans understood that their empire's success was tied to maintaining peace with the gods, particularly Neptune. The empire's reach across the Mediterranean required safe trade routes and naval supremacy, both of which were highly vulnerable to the whims of Neptune. Emperors, understanding this divine relationship, would often sponsor large-scale public works, such as the building of harbors, temples to Neptune, and even festivals in his honor, to maintain the god's favor. The Neptunalia, an annual festival dedicated to Neptune, was celebrated by the Romans in the summer, during the hot, dry months when they were most vulnerable to drought and poor harvests. The festival included sacrifices to Neptune in hopes of ensuring calm seas for trade and favorable weather for farming. It was a public reminder of Neptune's dual nature, a protector of the seas, but also a god who could unleash vengeance when disrespected. The power of Neptune's vengeance also manifested in the many naval disasters recorded throughout Roman history. One of the most significant was the disastrous defeat at the Battle of Drepana during the First Punic War in 249 BCE. A Roman fleet was decisively defeated by the Carthaginian navy, with many ships lost in a storm shortly afterward. The Romans believed that Neptune had turned the tide of battle against them as a punishment for their hubris. This event, alongside the failure of various other campaigns, became a powerful reminder to the Romans that the seas were not simply a tool of conquest, but also a reminder of their vulnerability to divine forces. In the larger scope of Roman life, Neptune's vengeance was a reflection of the Romans' complex relationship with the natural world. While they had conquered vast territories and mastered much of nature, they remained at the mercy of forces beyond their control, such as the sea, the weather, and the gods. These forces reminded them of their own fragility and the need to remain humble before the power of the divine. Today, Neptune's vengeance lives on in literature, art, and the collective imagination of the Western world. The imagery of the god of the sea, trident in hand, conjures both awe and fear, embodying the dangers of the unknown and the unpredictable forces of nature. Whether as Poseidon in the Odyssey or as Neptune in Roman mythology, the god's wrath has become a symbol of the consequences of overstepping mortal bounds and forgetting the delicate balance between human ambition and divine will. As the ancient world gave way to modernity, Neptune's role in mythology remained a reminder of the ever-present power of nature and the humility required to live in harmony with it. The seas remain an awe-inspiring force, and though mankind has mastered them in many ways, the story of Neptune's vengeance endures, urging humanity never to forget that the forces of nature and the gods are not to be trifled with. The last oracle of Apollo. In the ancient world, oracles were seen as the divine link between gods and mortals. These sacred sites, where the gods spoke through chosen intermediaries, held profound significance in the lives of those who sought guidance, whether for personal matters, political decisions, or military strategies. Among the most famous and revered of these oracles was that of Apollo At Delphi, the Pythian oracle. For centuries, the high priestess, known as the Pythia, channeled Apollo's words, offering prophecies to those who made pilgrimages to the temple. Yet, in the grand sweep of history, the oracle's final moments stand as a symbol of the shift from the old, divine traditions to the rise of new religions, particularly Christianity, that would eventually eclipse the ancient polytheistic beliefs of Greece and Rome. The Oracle of Delphi was the most renowned and influential in the ancient world, with the Pythia serving as Apollo's earthly medium. Situated on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in central Greece, Delphi was considered the omphalos, the navel of the world, marking the center of the earth in Greek mythology. The ancient Greeks believed that it was at Delphi where the god Apollo first slew the Python, a monstrous serpent guarding the sacred spring, and established his sanctuary. In this temple, the Pythia, often a woman chosen for her purity and spiritual devotion, would enter into a trance-like state, delivering prophecies in cryptic, enigmatic phrases. Apollo's oracle at Delphi was not merely a religious site. It was a political and cultural center. Kings, generals, and commoners alike sought the guidance of the oracle. The famous phrase, "Know thyself," was inscribed on the walls of the temple, urging those who visited to look inward for wisdom before seeking the advice of the gods. The oracles were often ambiguous, providing answers that could be interpreted in multiple ways, a feature that gave them a timeless, mystical quality. This ambiguity allowed the oracles to be useful in a variety of contexts, often influencing the outcomes of wars and political decisions across Greece and beyond. By the time of the Roman Empire, the Oracle of Delphi had reached its zenith, but the rise of new religious movements would soon cast a shadow over the ancient tradition. As the Roman Empire expanded, so did the influence of the Roman pantheon, and the worship of Greek gods like Apollo began to wane in favor of more centralized forms of worship. Christianity, still in its early stages, also began to spread across the Roman Empire, with its message of one God replacing the older polytheistic practices. While the oracle's influence remained significant for many centuries, by the 4th century AD, Delphi was starting to feel the pressure of both the growing Christian presence and the changing political climate. Emperor Theodosius I, who ruled from 379 to 395 AD, played a pivotal role in the decline of the pagan traditions. In 391 AD, he issued an edict that banned pagan rituals and closed temples throughout the Roman Empire, including Delphi's sanctuary of Apollo. The Oracle of Apollo, which had once been the heart of the classical world's spiritual and political life, was now caught in the crossfire of the transition from paganism to Christianity. As the emperor's decree was enforced, many pagan temples were shut down, their practices banned, and their sacred sites desecrated. Delphi, once a center of divine prophecy, now faced an uncertain future. The exact date of the last oracle of Apollo is shrouded in mystery, but it is generally believed that the final prophecies were given during the late 4th century AD, just before the decline of Delphi's temple. The last Pythia, whose name remains unknown, was said to have received a vision of the coming end. According to some accounts, the Pythia's final prophecy was foreboding, echoing the themes of doom that had pervaded many of the earlier prophecies throughout history. As the legend goes, the last oracle spoke in a cryptic message that foretold the fall of the old gods and the rise of a new era. The final prophecy of Apollo was a dark one, warning that the once great oracle of Delphi would soon fall silent and that a new belief system would take its place, one that would unite the empire under the banner of the Christian faith. The pagan gods, including Apollo, would fade into obscurity, and Delphi, once the divine center of the world, would become a relic of a bygone age. Some versions of the story suggest that the last oracle was not only a prophecy of religious transformation, but also a curse. The Pythia's final words were said to include a dire warning to those who would destroy the old temples and erase the sacred knowledge of the gods. In this version of the tale, the silence of the oracle of Apollo was not merely the passing of an old tradition, but a deep wound inflicted on the world by the rise of a new religion. With the rise of Christianity, the temples of the old gods were increasingly targeted, and Delphi was no exception. In the late 4th century, the once great temple of Apollo was plundered, its treasures looted, and its sacred rites abandoned. Delphi's sanctity as the center of prophecy was permanently shattered. In the years that followed, Delphi's influence dwindled, and the oracle was no longer consulted by leaders seeking divine guidance. Christianity's growing influence marked the end of an era for the oracle of Delphi. The destruction of the Temple of Apollo was symbolic of the broader societal shift from polytheism to monotheism. The Christianization of the Roman Empire, particularly under Emperor Constantine and his successors, was a cultural transformation that rendered the ancient gods obsolete. By the 5th century, Delphi's sanctuary lay in ruins, and the oracle of Apollo ceased to be a force in the spiritual and political life of the empire. The last oracle of Apollo marked the end of a spiritual tradition that had lasted for over a millennium. Yet, the legacy of Delphi and its oracles did not entirely disappear. Throughout the centuries, the oracle of Apollo continued to captivate the imagination of later generations, both in ancient and modern times. Writers, philosophers, and historians have looked back on the Delphic oracles as symbols of ancient wisdom and mysticism, drawing lessons from the cryptic pronouncements of the Pythia. In the modern era, the ruins of Delphi continue to be a site of archaeological fascination, attracting visitors from around the world who come to witness the remnants of one of the ancient world's most important religious centers. The Temple of Apollo and the theater, where ancient rituals were held, stand as a testament to the power and influence that the oracle once wielded. The inscriptions left by those who visited the oracle for counsel remain a lasting record of the diverse people who sought the guidance of Apollo across the centuries. In contemporary spirituality, the idea of oracles and prophetic voices continues to inspire. Modern interpretations of Delphi's oracles have influenced everything from literature and art to astrology and New Age practices. The symbolism of the Pythia, the woman who spoke with the gods, continues to resonate in cultural depictions of wisdom, intuition, and foresight. The last oracle of Apollo represents more than just the end of a sacred institution. It embodies the larger transition between the ancient pagan world and the new Christian order. The oracle of Delphi's final moments were a reflection of the cultural, religious, and political changes sweeping through the Roman Empire in the 4th century A.D. In many ways, the silence of Apollo's oracle echoed the silence of the old gods, who were gradually replaced by the single, omnipotent Christian God. The oracle's closing also symbolizes the fragility of human traditions and the inevitability of change. What had once been a powerful and revered source of divine guidance was ultimately silenced by forces beyond its control. Yet, the story of the last oracle lives on, reminding us of the ancient world's quest for wisdom, the ways in which humanity has sought to communicate with the divine, and the impermanence of all things, no matter